Crap. I wrenched the steering wheel over to the right, causing the tires to scream in protest. A deep horn blared loudly, almost rupturing my eardrums, and the interior was momentarily illuminated by harsh white headlights. For a split second, my light flashed in front of my eyes, and then I felt the bumpiness of the grassy edge of the road jostle me around. The 18-wheeler which had veered into my lane missed me by less than a foot, blasting by in a blur at what had been 70 miles an hour or more. After a split second of catching my breath, I jabbed the driver's window switch down and stuck my head out into the pouring rain. Idiot! I screamed at the retreating logging truck, though I knew the driver wouldn't be able to hear me. A moment later, an outraged woman's voice tumbled from the speakers of my rented Chrysler 300. I beg your pardon. Regaining my senses and remembering that I had been in the middle of a phone call, I sat back down in my seat. Not you, Aaron, I said apologetically. If you didn't hear the commotion on my end of the line, I almost got splattered all over the front end of some moron's Peterbilt who wandered over to my side of the road. There was a moment of silence from the speakers, and then my agent let out a small snort. Well, isn't that just grand? You gotta love idiots on the roads these days. It took a softer tone. I'm glad you didn't get into an accident, Al. I don't feel like losing my best client and close friend in one go. I laughed. Helps me relax to know that you care. I admitted then, after a moment getting the tension out of my muscles. I pulled the car back onto the road and continued on. It was the winter of 2022, and I was on my way to a book signing in Seattle from where I lived in Gold Beach, Oregon. I was a writer who had just broken the New York Times bestseller list with my debut novel, and as such, I was in the start of my book signing tour, which would take me around the country. Obviously, as many people would quickly realize who I am if I used my real name, I have changed it along with others. Aaron, my literary agent, had suggested that I fly to Seattle from the airport in North Bend. But I'm someone who's had a major anxiety over flying ever since the September 11th attack in 2001. So instead, knowing that I hadn't purchased a new car to replace my rather shabby and broken down one yet, she had arranged me a rental, and I had begun the almost 7.5-hour drive north. I wouldn't have had to deal with those dingbats if Interstate 5 hadn't jammed up with that accident, I muttered. Well, you were the one who wanted to drive, Al. Aaron's chiding voice came through the speakers. Do you have any idea where you are? I glanced at the GPS map for what had to have been the 100th time. The screen almost seemed to glitch, jumping as the antenna on the top of my car attempted to communicate with an orbiting satellite above. Piece of crap. No, this stupid navigation system is apparently on the fritz, I snorted. So much for Enterprise being a good car rental company. I looked back just in time to see a sign with the gas symbol flash past. Thank God for small favors, I thought. Hey, there's a gas station coming up soon. I'm a bit low anyway, so I'll stop there, get directions, and then I'll call you when I'm on my way, okay? There was a sigh on the speakers. Okay, just please try not to be too long. The publishing house won't like it if you show up to your very first book signing late tomorrow, she said. I'll be as quick as I can, I said reassuringly, and then pressed the red disconnect button on the steering wheel, ending the call. I let out a sigh of relief. Aaron was my saving grace and had been the one to orchestrate my contract, including a very nice advance, but after a while, it became exhausting to deal with her. I stared out at the windshield at the 2-lane road in front of me, relishing in the silence, save for the rain pelting the car's windshield, the windshield wipers flicking it off, and the tires on the wet pavement. For a few more minutes, all I saw was nothing but endless trees pushing in close to the road, almost seeming as if they were jostling to see who drove up and down past them. Then, almost as if my thoughts had summoned it, I saw the bright lights appear ahead on the right like a lighthouse beacon. It was clearly one which had been here a very long time. The overall appearance gave the impression that it had been around since at least the 1950s, if not earlier. I grunted with surprise as I saw the light-up station logo swinging around in a lazy circle on its pole. The faded green outline of a brontosaurus and similarly weathered red letters spelling out Sinclair were ones I thought that I would never see in person, seeing as how the company had gone defunct back in March. Guess nobody told the owner of this one that. I pulled into the station, my tires driving over a small black wire which had caused a classic bell to ding loudly twice, somewhere out of sight. Pulling up next to the green pump, I shut the engine off and relaxed back into the comfortable leather, listening to the tick of the engine cooling down. As I closed my eyes, I could only hear the loud buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the rain pelting the metal awning over the pumps. I opened my eyes as I heard the rain peter out and I looked around, glancing at the analog clock on the dash illuminated by the overhead lights. 7:30 p.m. 10 minutes had passed. I sighed. Come on, man, I muttered and then quickly tapped the horn. The blaring sound of it almost seemed to shatter the stillness like a baseball through a plate glass window. Still nobody. Dang it, I whispered, and then I unbuckled my seatbelt and I pulled on the handle, using my foot to kick open the door. A bitingly cold wind smashed into my face as I stepped out onto the cracked concrete, causing me to flip up the collar of my coat in response. I glanced around, only hearing the sounds of the wind whipping through the trees, crickets chirping, and what had to be the hoots of an owl somewhere off in the forest beyond. The garage bays were open, and in the faded yellow light of what had to be an old incandescent bulb, I could see what looked like a 50s Cadillac and a 70s International Scout up on the lifts, but no mechanic in sight. And leaning back into the car, I leaned on the horn longer this time. Again, the sound reverberated off the trees and station. For some reason, I shivered at the noise. It almost feels sacrilegious to disturb the silence out here. I shook my head. Where the heck had that thought come from? I shook it away and waited another minute or so. There was still no sign of life. Maybe the station is actually closed. The thought was worrying. I hadn't seen another sign of civilization, aside from that idiot logging truck in 2.5 hours. I didn't know how far it was until the next town or gas station, and as good as the Chrysler had been on gas, I didn't want to try driving further on only a quarter tank. I decided to find out for myself, slamming the driver's door closed with a loud thunk. Stepping around the front of the car, I walked across to the open bays, the sound of my footfalls echoing back at me. I glanced around, noticing the spilled oil on the ground, and the mismatched tools, bottles, and hoses heaved unceremoniously on the bench in the back. But still, I saw no one. Great, I thought, looking up to see the bright moon begin to appear from behind the clouds. I had begun to turn and stride towards what had to be an office or a convenience store when the figure burst out of the door, nearly causing me to jump out of my skin. Gah! I involuntarily let out, receiving a good-natured laugh in return. Sorry, sir, I didn't mean to startle you, let alone make you wait so long. I caught my breath, and then let out a strained chuckle and looked up at the man. He appeared to be in his late 40s or early 50s, dressed in a green Sinclair jumpsuit adorned with the same green dinosaur in the front patch. The patch on the other side proclaimed the man's name to be Harold. The remaining hair on his head was slicked back, and he flashed me a smile with surprisingly bright white teeth. I held up my hand, giving it a little wobble, and gave a laugh of relief. Don't worry about it, man. For a second, I thought this place was permanently closed or something, I said, the steadiness returning to my voice. No, sir, just the fact it's only little old me'd working the night shifts, he declared, jokingly wiping his brow. I snorted and smiled. The man clearly had a decent sense of humor. I'm guessing you need gas, he asked, changing the subject to business and gesturing to my car. I nodded. Yes, please, if you could fill her up with regular. He nodded and then began towards it as I jogged back around, opening the driver's door and pressing the button to pop the gas cap. Harold let out a low whistle as he pulled the pump from its cradle. Very nice car, sir, he exclaimed, looking it over. It looks expensive. I shrugged my shoulders. It is a nice car, a Chrysler 300S, but unfortunately it's not mine. He looked up at me and cocked an eyebrow as he slid the nozzle in and pulled on the handle. It's a rental, I added quickly, realizing it sounded like I had jacked it or something. He seemed to relax. Oh, yeah, that makes sense, he said jovially. It's nicer and newer than anything we normally see out here usually. I jerked my thumb at the open bays. I would say you have people with good taste around here, seeing as how that's a 55 Coupe de Ville back there, I said. He laughed, nodding approvingly. I see you know your cars, he said with an impressed tone, glancing at the readout on the pump. I do love them, I replied. He looked back up at me. So, are you some kind of auto collector, a race car driver then? He asked. I shook my head. No, afraid not. I'm a writer. He jerked his head up, his green eyes seeming to twinkle in the fluorescent lights. A writer? Well, blow me down. I never thought I would get a god-honest writer in my station, he exclaimed, smiling. I nodded, feeling a slight sense of uncomfortableness wash over me. I still hadn't gotten used to the reaction people had when they learned of my profession. He pressed forward. What kind of books do you write? He asked excitedly. I write in the horror genre, honestly, I admitted, causing him to smile wildly at the news. Hey, horror's my favorite style of books to read, he said. I love everything from the old classics to Stephen King. He looked at me quizzically. How many have you written so far? I held up a single finger. Just one published. I'm actually on the way to a publicity signing right now. He nodded approvingly, and then looked back at the pump before speaking again. So, have you ever seen anything truly scary? I raised an eyebrow at his question. That came completely out of left field. What do you mean by that? I asked in return. He still watched the pumps but replied. So many horror writers that I've heard talk about how they've had their own frightening experience, whether it's a plain old scare or even a supernatural experience. It's what helps them write truly horrifying tales. Now he looked back at me. His face held a smile which caused me to inwardly shudder a little bit. It almost seemed far too wide for a moment. Then blinking, I realized it was just a regular grin, if not just a bit of an odd one. The lights must have caused you to see things. He finished. So, I was just asking if you've ever had a scary experience which got you into writing horror. For a moment there was a silence between us as I pondered his question, only broken by an owl's screech somewhere in the gathering darkness. Then I shrugged. Honestly, I hate to disappoint you, but no, I admitted. He gave me a slightly surprised expression. Really? I nodded, deciding to be honest with him. Really? And to be completely truthful with you, Harold, as much as I love horror, both writing it and reading and watching it, I've stopped being scared of it a while ago. The surprised expression seemed to grow on his face. Really? He repeated and then looked down at the pump again. That's a shame, he said, his voice almost holding a trace of sadness in it. I nodded, having to agree with him. It is. I used to love getting scared by a good horror film or a book. But as I got older, it just seemed to, drift away. Now I just write what I know others are afraid of. like I did with my first book here, but honestly, when I write, I don't feel that fear in me at all. I hated admitting it, even when I had given my first online interview with a magazine about my novel. I had lied about it, saying that my own work could scare the heck out of me. But in a way, it felt good to finally admit the truth to someone, even just a stranger that I would likely never see again. I looked up to find him giving me a rather intense and honestly extremely creepy stare. His green eyes almost seemed to glow in the lights, and his smile had completely disappeared. I took a step back at the abrupt change in his demeanor, but just as quickly it too was wiped away, replaced by the smile that I had known since he appeared. "Well, I'm sure if you search hard enough, you'll find that feeling again," he said, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine empathy. I nodded, looking out at the woods. "I hope," I truthfully admitted, and then heard the sound of the pump finally clicking off. All done," Harold said happily, pulling the pump out of the car and replacing it back in its cradle. He looked at the readout. "That'll be $23.17. I started slightly. Under $24 for 3/4 of a tank. I haven't heard of gas this cheap since I was at least a teenager, but at the same time, I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I reached into my back pocket, pulling out my wallet, and from it, my credit card. "Do you happen to accept credit?" I asked, half afraid that he would tell me he didn't. But he plucked the card happily out of my hand. "Of course we do, Mr. He looked down the name on my card. "Mr. Damascus. The credit card reader, however, is back inside the main building." He gestured back towards the door that he had exited from. "Would you mind if I took it back there and ran it?" I shook my head. "No, by all means, go right ahead," I said. And he turned away and strode back across towards the building. "I'll be right back out with your receipt, quicker than you can say. Bob's your uncle," he called. I let out another laugh at the phrase that I hadn't heard in years when I noticed something. I hadn't seen the man's back since he had appeared, and this was my first time. The back of his jumpsuit was the same stained green as the front, with a red oil rag peeking out of the back pocket. But my eyes were drawn to one thing. What looked like a large tear in it, just below the large logo patch adorning the back, almost as if he had been slashed. I could see an equally stained white shirt underneath it. Hey," I called out to him. He stopped and turned back to me, still smiling. "Yes?" he asked. I pointed to my own back. Your jumpsuit has a huge tear in the back of it. Just wanted to tell you in case you didn't know." For a moment, the same funny look came over his face, and then he waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, I know. I haven't had a chance to mend it yet," he said, and then holding up a finger pulled open the door, causing a bell hung from the inside handle to jing, and he stepped inside. I was left alone again, with only the buzzing sound of the lights almost causing my ears to ring in the sudden silence. Not wanting to seem rude by waiting back in the car, I instead walked to the front and leaned against the hood, staring out into the night. My eyes absent-mindedly drifted off into the gloom as I waited for Harold to return. That's when my eyes finally glanced over at the large sign directly ahead of me. It was the one which advertised the price for gas by the gallon. And as I had pulled in from the other way, not to mention getting too caught up talking, I hadn't even looked at it. You could easily tell that it had fallen into a bit of disrepair, as the light inside, which allowed you to see the prices at night, flickered on and off, precariously, seeming as though it would burn out at any second. You could even hear it flickering loudly in the silence. That wasn't what drew my eye, though. No, what drew my eye was the prices displayed on the flickering sign. "There's absolutely no freaking way," I whispered to myself. I scanned down but kept looking at the top two figures. 88 cents a gallon for regular. I felt a small wave of confusion fall over me. No matter how out in the middle of nowhere the station was, there was no way that it would charge that little for gas. Not to mention, It showed prices for both unleaded and leaded gasoline, something that had been banned since at least the mid-90s. As my mind attempted to process this, something else fully sunk in. The entire forest around the station had fallen silent. And I'm not talking a normal silence either. The crickets, the owl, the rustling of what I thought were deer or elk in the trees had vanished. Even the wind had seemed to stop. It was an almost unearthly stillness, as if the entire forest were holding its breath. It was beyond unnerving and eerie, to say the least, and it caused a shiver to shoot up my spine. The only sound that I could hear was the almost maddeningly loud buzz of the overhead lights, which seemed to drone like that of a growling creature. I realized every muscle in my body had tensed up, though I couldn't understand why. Sure, the silence is eerie, but it's nothing to be afraid of, I thought. As much as I repeated that thought to myself, I couldn't help but feel increasingly on edge in the stillness. Okay, screw this, I said finally, the sound of even my own echoing voice sounding just off to me. Pushing myself off my hood and beginning for the door that Harold had gone through. As I walked, I looked at the watch on my wrist, seeing another 15 minutes had passed since he had left. Where is he? Letting out a sigh, both of frustration and to try and relieve some of the odd sensation forming in my gut, I finally reached the door and reached out, gripping the handle. It felt almost shockingly cold in my hand, and I quickly twisted it, opening the door and causing the bell to jingle, sounding too loud in the quiet. I stepped inside and allowed it to swing shut behind me, the bell giving another jingle, this time muted, in the building's interior. I looked around. Aside from an old Coca-Cola machine in one corner of the room, there were no food or drinks in here. Instead, the 2 or 3 aisles taking up most of the space were filled with what looked like older-style cans of motor oil and other assorted automotive bits and bobs, all adorned with the dinosaur logo. I drew in a breath and then I coughed a little. It felt more than a little musty in here, as if it hadn't been aired out in a long time. Looking directly ahead, I saw the counter that Harold must usually be stationed at. An older-style cash register sat atop it, and behind it lay an open door marked Employees Only. Beyond was a long tiled hallway which stretched out for a while before disappearing around a corner. I stared at the cash register. I haven't seen one of these old jobs since I was a kid in the 90s. I thought a few nostalgic emotions breaking through my other emotions and tugging at my heartstrings, but it just as quickly shooed away by the uneasy feeling that was settling over me like a cloud of dust. This whole thing, this whole place just seemed wrong. I couldn't tell why, but it was making my arms and legs feel as though insects were inching along under my skin. After a moment's hesitation, I opened my mouth. Hey Harold, I called, my voice seeming muted just like the bell had. I waited. No answer. Hey Harold, are you back there? I called again. Still nothing. The feeling increasingly on edge as the fluorescent lights in here sounded like they were also buzzing too loud. I craned my neck to look down the corridor. Just barely at the corner, I saw the bright blue sign indicating a restroom. I made my decision, calling out again. Look, if you can hear me, Harold, I'm coming over to the counter to use the restroom, okay? I can't hold it until I get to the next town. That was a lie. I hadn't eaten or drank anything in the last 2 hours to make me have to go. But just in case he came around the corner, I didn't want to get into trouble, as odd as I felt. I still didn't want to piss the man off. Taking a deep breath, I hopped the counter and stepped into the corridor. Unlike the main room, this was lit by 3 or 4 incandescent light bulbs dangling down from the ceiling. It gave the hall a slightly dimmer look than behind me, and I hesitated for a moment before starting down it, taking care not to have my footsteps echo too much. The hall seemed to go on forever, but eventually I reached the corner. Wanting to keep up appearances, I turned the knob for the bathroom and opened it. After looking in for a split second, I shut it quickly, suppressing a cough and a gag. It had looked disgusting, as though it hadn't been cleaned in years, if not decades. Turning back, I noticed a brighter light down at the end of the next stretch of hallway. I debated for a moment and then I began down it. All I wanted was to be out of here. I passed another open door, glancing through it. I saw the 2 garage bays and the view outside. The blast of cold, fresh air relieved me somewhat and I continued on. As I reached the doorway, I looked around, seeing that it was an office. 2 desks stood inside, each with nameplates on the edge of them. I spied Harold's name on the far one. I also saw my credit card sitting in the middle of the table. The bright blue stood out amongst the dark wood and the white papers. Letting out a relieved sigh, I crossed to it quickly and picked it up. I decided that I would leave a 20 and 10 in cash on the desk instead and just get the heck out of here. I didn't know where the man had gone to, and every fiber of my being was telling me to leave. As I reached for my wallet, my eyes caught a plaque on the wall behind the desk, the faux gold glinting in the low light. I stared at it. The photograph was clearly Harold's, looking almost the same as I had seen him, just a lot cleaner. Below that was a declaration etched into the fake gold. Employee of the month, Harold Janikowski. I couldn't help but smile a little at how hard he must have worked for it. Less than a second later, though, the smile dropped from my face as I read the inscription underneath it. August 1976. I shook my head, hoping that I was just seeing things in the low light, hoping that it would change to 2006 or heck, even 1996. But no, it remained the same. What the? I breathed out, feeling another shiver go down my spine. There was absolutely no way that, if he looked to be in his 40s or 50s in the mid-70s, that he would still look the same 46 years later. He would at least be in his 80s or 90s now, and would very much not still be working here. What is going on? I whispered again, feeling like tendrils of dread were reaching out of the gloom and jamming themselves in me. I turned to book it out of the room and out of the station entirely. But I froze as I saw Harold. He sat in an old-style black swivel chair, his back to me in the next room. I couldn't tell what the room was, as it was lit only by a single, very dim bulb directly over him. But the room was giving me off truly creepy vibes. For the first time in years, I felt the first inklings of fear. Before I had a chance to move or say anything, he spoke. "Well, Mr. Damascus," he said, his voice almost inflectionless. I began to speak. "Look, I'm sorry that I barged back in here, it's just..." I was cut off as he continued. "Well, Mr. Damascus, how do you feel?" My shoulders thumped as I felt a wave of confusion envelop me. "Excuse me?" I managed out. "How do you feel?" He repeated and then continued, his voice finally seeming to gain some cadence to it. "Do you feel afraid? Do you feel fear?" He let out a low chuckle, one that almost seemed different from the happy one that I had heard outside. I didn't know how to respond. Finally, he spoke again. "It's okay, you don't have to tell me. I know, I can feel it." He let out another chuckle and I felt multiple shivers shoot up my spine. "And frankly, Mr. Damascus, I'm happy about that," he said, standing up but still keeping his back to me. "Because you all taste so much better when you're afraid." This time I did manage to say something. "The heck?" It wasn't the most eloquent response, but apparently Harold had found it funny, as he let out another low, creepy chuckle. He finally turned towards me and I jumped backwards, slamming into his desk and causing his nameplate to fall to the ground. The man still smiled at me, his smile now holding a very definitive wideness to it, holding an almost pants-wetting wickedness in it. But he didn't seem alive. His previously sparkling green eyes now seemed glassy and unseeing, To put it bluntly, he almost more resembled a ventriloquist dummy, a puppet than anything. He almost seemed to lean towards me, and finally he spoke. "I'll make it sporting, though. You have 20 seconds to run," he said. Swallowing hard, I looked around and saw a tire iron on his desk. I snatched it up, ready to club the man over the head if he made a move towards me. That's when he simply dropped forward onto his face. He fell halfway forward into the room and didn't move. I looked down at him and gasped as I realized what I was seeing. The man looked like nothing more than a deflated beach ball, as though all the organs and blood in him had been sucked out. I saw the tear in the back of his jumpsuit again, this time much more pronounced. Behind it, his dirty white shirt had been torn as well, and it revealed a hole in his actual back. I could see the white of his spine clearly visible in the yellow light. As I stared down at him, I heard a voice. This one, though, was not Harold's. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, much lower than I had ever heard a human voice speak, and it alone almost made me piss myself, because it held a truly evil, sadistic tone to it. 20, 19, 18, 17. I looked up and into the darkened room Harold had fallen out of, and finally, for the first time in years, I screamed. Hovering just in the darkness beyond the edge of the dim light's gaze were two enormous, glowing green eyes. They were larger than a human's eyes ever could be, and in a very inhuman shape, looking like crescent moons. They held the most evil, sadistic glee that I had ever seen in my life. At my scream, the voice stopped counting down and it laughed. A great booming laugh that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. And then it began counting down again, the malicious excitement in it audible. 16, 15, 14. I didn't wait any longer. I didn't want to see what those eyes belonged to. I turned and sprinted out of the office, running down the corridor, my footfalls and panicked breathing echoing back to me like a gunshot. The corridor seemed to go on forever, and I couldn't understand why it was taking so long to reach the corner. Finally, though, I reached it, and froze. I was back at the entrance to the office. What the? Behind me, I heard the voice reach 10, and I began sprinting again down the hallway. It seemed to take even longer to reach the corner, and this time, I reached out to grab the corner edge, only to grab the wooded edge of the office door. My eyes widened, and I felt tears begin to fall from my eyes as I ran again. The voice continued as I dashed down the ever-increasing corridor. 7, 6, 5. I let out a strangled sob as I grabbed for the tiled corner, pushing off the edge of the corridor to snatch at it. Instead, I smashed into the wall next to the office door. I fell in a heap, trying to force myself up when I heard it finished. 3, 2, 1. Ready or not, Mr. Damascus. Here I come. As it finished uttering the last word, the voice dropped even lower, as if I were hearing the voice of the devil himself speak to me. I realized if I looked behind me now that I would see it. Standing in the middle of the office over its human puppet, I refused to look back. I knew that it wanted me to. Tears flowed freely down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my head where I had slammed into the wall. Every horror movie death in movies and books flashed through my mind, and I knew all of them weren't even remotely as horrible as what that thing had planned for me. That's when I thought just a tiny glimmer of hope flashed through my mind, something that I had seen as I had walked down the hall to the office. I felt adrenaline coursing through me. I might die trying to do this, but I have to try, I thought. I heard the floor behind me rattle and I felt hot, stinking breath fall across the back of my neck. For a microsecond, I felt paralyzed with fear, and then I let out a strangled cry exploding into motion. I heard a bellow of frustration behind me, followed by a laugh. It knew once I had reached the end of the corridor, it would use whatever power it had to bring me right back next to it. It had power over this corridor, but it doesn't realize that it left a weak spot open. The thought still echoing in my mind, I ran, unable to keep myself from screaming this time as I dashed down the corridor. It seemed even longer than before, but as I reached the halfway point, I saw what I had been hoping to spy. The door into the garages stood open, almost hidden out of sight beyond a shelf of oil. I let out another cry, this one of determination. Behind me, I heard the creature stop laughing. Now it let out a bellowing cry of rage, realizing what I intended to do. I felt it begin to thunder up the corridor after me to snatch me up. The feeling of something sharp sliced across my back. And then I was leaping for the doorway and through it. I landed in a puddle of still, sticky oil underneath the Cadillac. What I saw now was rusting away with decades of disrepair. Not wasting a second, I jumped to my feet and ran for the open bay doors. Behind me, I heard a louder bellow, but I didn't look back. I burst out from inside the doors into the night, now laden with the sounds of the forest again. I dashed for my car, almost flying over the hood, and ripped open the driver's door. Crashing into the seat, I stabbed at the start button. For a moment terrified that, like the typical horror cliche, it wouldn't start. But to my surprise and gratitude, it did, the roar of the V6 thundering out. As I grabbed the knob to jam into drive, I risked one glance up, and I couldn't help but scream out again. The entire gas station had gone dark. The inside, the overhead lights, everything. I could see the outline of the building, but that was it. And the eyes glowed at me from inside the bays with absolute rage and hatred. Still screaming and staring at them, I slammed my foot down onto the accelerator. The tires screamed and the car shot forward like a rocket, tearing out from under the awning and out onto the road. I refused to look in the rearview mirror. I knew that I would see those eyes one final time in them, and I didn't want to. I just kept my eyes on the road in front of me, as far as my headlights reached, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel and roared away from that place behind me. I just about never let up my foot from that gas pedal, taking the corners far too fast. Not until the warm lights of the next town finally came into view, one that I can't recall the name of. I felt myself beginning to cry, this time tears of happiness and relief. I drove straight through to the police station. I knew that I could never tell them what had actually happened to me. They would think that I was utterly insane or on something. But I could tell them that I had been attacked by a crazed lunatic at an old gas station, and that's exactly what I did. I burst in, begging to speak to someone. The officers at the desk calmed me down and took my statement, taking it all very seriously when I showed them my back, which, as it turned out, had 3 deep slashes in it. But when I told them where it happened, confused looks came over both their faces. As a paramedic rushed in from outside to check my wounds, one of the officers walked into the back, returning with the sergeant on duty, an older gentleman in his 60s. "Please tell me again what happened to you," he had asked gently. I did, and when I finished, he shook his head. "Son, it couldn't have possibly have happened at the Sinclair station 10 or 12 miles back," he said softly. I stammered. "Why not?" I demanded, struggling for my words. "Because," he began, "it closed in 1979 after a huge fire had gutted it, killing everybody inside. It's been almost a half a year since that incident now. I never made my book signing, which earned me a furious phone call from Erin. Her fury disappeared when she heard that I had been attacked. I told her that it had been from someone that I had pulled over attempting to help on the side of the road. I didn't want to repeat the same conversation that I had had with the police. They said they would try and find whoever had attacked me, but I know they never will. Not after they showed me a newspaper article, yellowed with age, showing the burned-out hulk of the gas station that I had been to, along with a very familiar photograph of a smiling man next to it. I still am a horror writer. The horror that I saw that night didn't stop me from writing. My second novel is due out this year, but now whenever I sit down on my computer and begin to write a truly scary scene, I feel the chills of fear for my own creation jolt up my spine, because I know true horrors lie in this world, and I hope I never come across them again. I'm posting this here not only to tell the truth finally about what I experienced, but also as a warning to anyone who will listen. If you're ever in the Pacific Northwest on a lonely 2-lane road in the middle of nowhere, and you happen to come across an old-looking gas station lit up with a green Brontosaurus logo spinning in the night, just keep your foot hard down and keep going, because you may not be as lucky as I was. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. How's your social battery right now? Do you find yourself drained or tired? For me, it seems to change over time, but currently, I'm a little overwhelmed with day-to-day tasks and different social events picking up with the nicer weather. It definitely can be easy to ignore your social battery and spread yourself too thin without giving yourself the time to recharge. Maybe you thrive around people, or maybe you need some more alone time. Whatever it might be, therapy can give you the self-awareness to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. If you're thinking of starting therapy and giving it a try, well, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch between therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/MrCreeps today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MrCreeps. In 2016, despite how cliche it sounds, I was working as a private investigator in rural Oregon. Most people make the stereotype that private detectives and investigators have walk-in clients, but that simply isn't true. I get almost all of my cases from clients by phone, and the call that I got in June was no exception. The client, a man named Jonathan Alexander, was calling about the disappearance of his father, Sergio Alexander. Jonathan's father had gone missing ever since a solo deer hunting trip in the backwoods of our little Oregon town, and the search parties and official parties hadn't turned up anything. In most cases like this, you're looking for a body in the woods, not a living person. But Jonathan was hopeful, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. In this case, I took my go bag, a duffel bag, and its contents were a bottle of water, a first aid kit, my Taurus Raging Hunter, a bag of Ziploc bags, and my wallet and phone and food. A Taurus Raging Hunter revolver might have been overkill, but I was planning to go into the woods. And the woods can be a dangerous place. This part of Oregon was stocked full of cougars, mountain lions, bears, wolves, moose, and some others, and almost everyone carried a heavier firearm when going into the backwoods. The first place on my schedule was Jonathan's house, where I would meet him in person and have an interview. As I pulled up into his dirt driveway, I got a sense of the person that he was. His house was a 20-foot trailer stuck to the ground, with a backyard and patio facing the mountains. "Are you Jonathan?" I asked the man waiting for me. He was tall, at least 6'5", and wearing a checkered button-up, a trucker cap, and jeans. "Yeah," he replied. "You're Inspector Jacob, right? Come inside, I'll tell you the details. I also have some things that could help you, depending on how willing you are." I walked inside the trailer, and the interior was everything that I expected. The walls were lined with taxidermied bass and catfish, as well as several mounted deer heads and rifles propped up on display. A dirty kitchen with piles of dishes in one corner, and a small 2-person table on the other. Jonathan, John for short, and I sat down. Jonathan offered me a beer, but I declined. I never drank on the job. I started with the regular questions. Well, where was he last seen? Who was with him? What happened leading up to the night of the disappearance? John replied, telling the whole story. My dad, Sergio, was a hunter and fisherman. Hunting and fishing were his life. He always had a rifle or a fishing rod. He's in his 60s and was in the military for 7 years. Had a few tours in Afghanistan. On that night, he wanted to go solo buck hunting in the evening, so I dropped him off on a dirt road near his favorite spot. He didn't come back for 2 days. This was somewhat normal. He sometimes would hunt overnight or just got lost. But after a week passed, I got really worried. I could feel that something was wrong. I could feel it to my gut. I called the sheriff and they organized a search party for 3 nights. We went in every direction, covered all the ground, and you know what? Not a single thing. Not a candy bar, no footsteps leading past his spot. No trail, nothing. After he was declared deceased, I went on myself to search. I know that he's still out there. I know it. And where is this dirt road? John marked the road on the GPS on my phone and I thanked him and laughed. I had a no solve, no pay rule, so I wouldn't get paid unless I found Sergio, dead or alive. My next stop was at the sheriff's office in the middle of my small town. I drove past multiple roadside stores until I reached the parking lot of the sheriff's office. I parked and walked into the place, going up to the front desk where a tall and skinny deputy was doing paperwork and chewing gum, presumably as a substitute for a cigarette. I told him that I was looking into the disappearance of Sergio Alexander, and he sent me to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a balding man in his 50s named Clyde, showed a forced smile as I walked inside. A stained American flag was pinned to the wall, along with dozens of missing person posters and wanted posters. So, Inspector, is this missing guy a friend of yours? He asked. No, I replied. A client wants me to find him. Sergio is the guy's dad. Well, you're in luck, Clyde replied. We haven't gotten much criminal activity, so I can show you some of the search party reports. Clyde reached into his desk and pulled out a stack of papers and photos which I flicked through. One of the photos captured an image showing a trail of footprints ending abruptly. And what is this? I asked. It's the strangest part of the case. The footprints leading to Sergio's favorite hunting spot just stopped. No trail leading somewhere else, no tire tracks, no ATV tracks, nothing. It's like he just up and vanished into thin air. I sighed. This case was going to be a hard one. What else of interest was there? I asked, looking through the files. Clyde pulled out a satellite image of the woods, with a Sharpie written on the spot where Sergio had gone missing. This is the entire area in which we estimate that Sergio could have walked around in the time that he was gone, Clyde stated. And we checked every bit of it. And guess what? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But there was one thing we found of interest. Which is? I asked. Well, there is a pattern. Every time we checked a place, we heard Sergio's radio coming from somewhere. I raised an eyebrow, and Sheriff Clyde continued. But it was very, very faint. Could barely hear it. And another strange thing was when we went to search for Sergio, in the entire area that he went missing, all the birds and animals were quiet, even the crickets. As soon as we had left the area of the supposed disappearance, the sound all came back. I checked my watch. It was early evening. After jotting down all the notes that I could gather, I thanked the sheriff and I left. My next stop? The woods. By the time I pulled up to the dirt road in my pickup truck, it was well into getting dark. This wasn't the ideal time for me to search through the area and find clues. Every detective knows how important the first 45 hours are. The place was exactly as John had described it. It was extremely rural, just a few miles away from a mountain range, and it was completely silent. The forest should have been alive, with birds chirping, wild turkeys moving about, crickets chirping, but the night was dead. Turning on my headlamp, I found Sergio's footsteps from when he was last seen, and started combing through the area. Just like Clyde and Jonathan had said, the trail abruptly stopped in the middle of the woods. Nothing. No other signs that Sergio was even there. It was as if he had just up and vanished. Suddenly, I heard some rustling behind me. It was fully dark by now, and nobody should have been there beside me. The sound came again, except it was now in front of me, but just out of reach of my headlamp. "Who's there?" I yelled. "Show yourself, I'm armed." For dramatization, I flicked the revolver holster from my Taurus on my belt. Suddenly, something tapped me right in the back. I didn't have time to pull out my gun, and considering that whoever was doing this was probably some drunk guy, I wouldn't need it. I turned into a Mike Tyson haymaker in the thing's direction, and ended up hitting a tree and nearly breaking my wrist. In the split second that I was proud of my Mike Tyson haymaker, I realized that I had punched a tree, and that my knuckles were actually bleeding. Whoever was behind me, if there was someone behind me, they were long gone. And that was when the laughing started. Actually, it was more like a cackling. A weird, crazy, and unnatural cackling. Whatever you would call it, it was unsettling anyway. I pulled out my revolver designed to drop bears and fired a deafening shot into the air. The laughing, everything stopped for a bit, and I almost let my guard down. And then I heard something whisper, just an inch away from my ear. It said, "Leave this place." And the next thing I know, I hear the sound of a million running footsteps catching up to me, and I get the heck out of there. I ran right out of the woods, fast enough to outrun Usain Bolt. Adrenaline is one heck of a drug. I jumped in my pickup truck, turned the engine, and peeled out of there all in record time. Whatever was behind me was still chasing me behind the car. I looked into the rearview mirror to try to look at the thing, which was running at least 80 miles per hour to keep up with me, and I saw nothing. Well, it wasn't a conceptual nothing. It was nothing in the sense that it was nothing my brain could comprehend and understand. There was a huge, blurry shape running after me, dark as the night and fuzzy around the edges. It was as if somebody had taken a huge mass of static from an 80s TV, made it into some sort of creature, and put it on a dirt road at 9 o'clock to chase some poor private investigator. I turned the road, drove down the road until I reached town. The thing was obviously gone. I parked at a gas station parking lot and threw up once my body realized how much running I had done. The next day, I headed to a woman named Meredith's house. I had heard about her from when I was at the bar the night I saw the demon thing, by some paranormal junkies who were interested in what I said. Meredith owned a teen plant shop at the edge of town, having the shop based on the first floor of her house. She also knew a thing or two about paranormal entities, the occult, monsters, ghouls, and, well, you get the gist. I pulled up into the driveway of her shop and knocked on the door. "We're closed," somebody, probably Meredith, yelled. I looked at the store hours taped on the front door. Today was a Friday, and according to her, probably outdated store hours chart, she was, as a matter of fact, open. "You're open, so stop being lazy," I yelled right back. Meredith ground and opened the triple lock door. In person, she was a short Latino woman with long black hair and a purple beanie, and wearing a trench coat and jeans, which was not totally suspicious. "What do you want?" she snapped. What I want is to know what is in those woods. And lady, don't piss me off, I'm still hungover. You studied the paranormal and supernatural, or am I wrong? No, you're not wrong. Good, because yesterday I got bullied and chased by some weird demon thing while looking for a missing man in his 60s. Meredith's face went pale. I taught myself how to learn and read expressions that people make, and by the looks of it, she knew exactly what I was talking about. Come in. I might be able to help you. Like Jonathan's house, I was easily able to tell the interior of the house from the outside. There were plants everywhere, on the walls, growing in giant pots on the floor, as well as shelves stocked full of beakers and test tubes, and a few bags full of strange substances. I sat down on a worn-out couch while Meredith assessed my situation. First of all, who told you about me? She asked. Some British fellow named Ron, I said, but then again I was drunk, so it might have been a John or a Bob. How did you say this thing looked like? Big, dark, and blurry. I couldn't actually see it since I was at least 800 feet away, but it was running 80 miles per hour, whatever it was. Huge, it must have been over 20 feet big. Did you look at it directly? Meredith asked. I answered plainly, no. I looked at it through the rearview mirror though, and even then I couldn't see it very well. Must be why you're alive. What was that? I asked. What you just described is what we in the business call nagalagkus. Nagalagkus, I muttered. The heck is that? No one really knows, Meredith replied. He, she, whatever it is ancient. It's been in these woods for probably over a century, and no one knows where he came from. You said that you were looking for a missing guy, right? Well, the Nagalaku probably took him. It might eat him, might let him go, might keep him for eternity, I don't know. Then how do I kill this thing? I asked. I need to close this case. Well, you probably can't, Meredith said. But whatever you do, don't look directly at it, or your mind will literally melt at the unfathomable horror, and you will die. Do not look at it. Don't look at the demon thing, I said. Gotcha. Do you have, any herbs or materials that will stop it from hurting me or doing anything? I do, actually. It's white ash, blessed by a shaman. If you sprinkle it over yourself or any weapons you have, it should be more effective against any supernatural being. Meredith stood up and walked toward a cabinet, and pulled out a large Ziploc bag of white ash, which seemed to glow and vibrate, and she handed it to me. This ain't free, she said. It's $100. I sighed and reached into my wallet, and pulled out $100 in cash, and handed it to Meredith in exchange for the white ash. Hey, Meredith called out as I packed up my stuff and headed for the door. Yeah, be careful. Like that was even possible. I got out of there and drove to the gas station, where I planned to get my supplies for the hunt to find Sergio Alexander. But before that, I needed to fuel up. I bought incendiary rounds for my revolver that the gas station surprisingly sold, and I ordered a pineapple pizza while listening to Piano Man by Billy Joel. After I finished up and threw out my garbage, I had devised a plan, which involved flares, a bottle of vodka, a huge jug filled with gasoline, and a Molotov cocktail. The cashier, a guy named John, seemed very interested in the thing that I bought from the gas station. He was a tall guy in his 50s with a graying beard, a trucker cap, and a military attitude. What are all these things for? He asked, as I heaved the heavy gasoline tank onto the counter, along with some other flammable and extremely dangerous things. Oh, nothing, I answered, trying not to sound suspicious. Just trying to take care of a pest problem. But John didn't see that as nothing. You're going into the woods, ain't ya? I was caught off guard by how easily and accurately he knew what I was doing. Yes, I replied. Well, I'm off work after the shift, so I'll come with you. Or I could just report to the police that a private investigator is buying suspicious amounts of flammables and gasoline, along with a .45 Magnum incendiary rounds for a Taurus Raging Hunter revolver. "You Army?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied. "Been in the Marines and the Navy for a couple of years. Had 5 tours in Afghanistan." I didn't see any reason why John shouldn't come with me, and besides, I could use his military and combat skills, which might be useful. And I wasn't going to carry a 55-gallon tank full of gasoline in the middle of the woods alone. "Fine," I said. "Let's do this." A few hours later, just as the sun was setting, John and I got out of my pickup truck in front of the woods. John had brought his trusty 12-gauge packed with Dragon's Breath rounds and a mini flamethrower. John would be my backup and the bait, while I carried the gasoline tank duct-taped to an explosive Molotov cocktail. The plan was, we go to the woods, to the spot where I had last been attacked by the Sagoth, and wait. Once we had heard a sign of him, we would both put on our blindfolds to avoid having our souls sucked out by the unfathomable sight of the eldritch cosmic horror. "You ready?" John asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just don't shoot me while you have your blindfold on." We walked into the woods in silence, and after a mile or so, I reached the spot where Sergio was last seen. We sat there and waited an hour or so until all the noise suddenly stopped, and I heard the sound of something massive dragging across the forest floor. "Put on your blindfold," I said, putting on mine. "We can't risk seeing this thing." John nodded, grinned, and put the blindfold on. Whatever it was, it sounded massive. It said, in a demonic and ancient voice, "Leave this place." John and I fired a shot into the direction of the voice, and although my bullet missed by a mile, the old man's shot was a direct hit. Although I couldn't hear it, I saw the light from the blast of fire, the sparks and flames coming from the barrel of John's shotgun, and it hit the demon monster. The thing screeched and we moved back a few steps, still blind. And without warning, the ground opened up beneath us. "What the?" John and I fell into the cavern beneath us, 6 feet down. "You okay?" I asked. "Never been better," John replied. "Where are we?" I lifted my blindfold and looked around to see that we had fallen into a subterranean tunnel that led deeper into the earth. "Anyone there? Please help!" A voice screamed, presumably Sergio's based on these circumstances. We ran down the tunnel in search for Sergio, and we found the man, lying on the cave floor with a broken leg. "We're gonna get you out of here," I said. But I could hear a screech come from the entrance to the tunnel, as the monster crawled down, breaking the walls. I reached down and picked up the tank of gasoline, had my eyes closed and waited until the monster was just close enough, my heart beating. "Get out!" I lit the Molotov, yelled at John to take cover, just as the beast got within a dozen meters in our range. I had previously sprinkled the white ash Meredith had given me on the gasoline tank for extra effectiveness, so that it could kill it if the explosion didn't. It was only a few meters away from us. I lit the gasoline bomb and threw it, and as it exploded, I grinned. "Gotcha." So, the funny thing is, a group of redneck hunters found us later on. They had apparently found the hole in the explosion crater and investigated. John and I had suffered some mild burns from the enormous gasoline explosion, but the missing guy Sergio came out harmless besides the broken leg that he had already had. The redneck family dragged us all the way to their pickup truck and then drove us to the hospital, where we all got treated for our injuries. Sergio was found and reunited after a long disappearance, and Jonathan paid me in the thousands, with the money I didn't expect him to have. When I went back to the place where Sergio had disappeared, and where I had blown the beast high to the sky, I found a very strange, giant, half-human skeleton where I remembered it getting blown up. Sergio Alexander was found and I had killed one of the things that went bump in the night. Case closed. Today's episode is sponsored by Ghostbed. Did you know that you'll end up spending 1/3 of your life sleeping? That's a huge chunk of time, so it's important to make your sleeping needs a priority. Ghostbed provides high-quality and super comfortable award-winning mattresses crafted in the United States and Canada. With their patented cooling technology exclusive to Ghostbed mattresses, you'll never have to worry about being too hot or uncomfortable when you're sleeping. Ghostbed mattresses, sheets, and pillows are made from premium materials designed for durability and comfort. And they also come with a 101-night at-home sleep trial on all mattresses and pillows, and over a 20-year warranty, plus free shipping and returns included on mattresses. Are you ready for a more comfortable night of sleep? Well, visit ghostbed.com/Mr. Creeps. And because we're all about sharing the love here on Creepscast, use the code Mr. Creeps to save 50% off your purchase site-wide. That's right, 50%. Back in the long-forgotten year of 1988, I was 13, spending my first time going on an overnight camping trip. Back in those days, there was limited options for entertainment. My parents were going to go crazy with me running around the house for the entire summer. They had put together some money to send me away for a trip to the lake for 3 days. I packed my bags right away, feeling excited that I was finally being trusted going somewhere overnight without my parents. The group was made of 6 girls all around the same age, with 2 adults as supervisors. They held 3-day camping trips every weekend in the summer and normally had a bigger turnout. For whatever reason, we had a smaller group, which was fine by the 2 adults that were taking care of us. Herding 6 barely teenage girls around the woods was a hard enough job. The first day went smooth, despite our bursts of energy threatening to sabotage the trip. We each got into pairs as a tent buddy. We needed to set up our tents on our own, or mostly on our own. Katie was my tent buddy. We started off strong, setting up, but needed help putting the last few poles into the packed dirt. I knew Katie from school, but wasn't in the same class as her. She was a shy girl, but we got along just fine. The other girls started to tease her because Katie was the youngest, yet the biggest girl of us all. In that moment, I decided to defend her during the weekend, and we kept working away at the tent, ignoring the other girls until they had lost interest. Proud of our work setting up our tent, we treated each other to treats that we had stashed away in our bags. After lunch was finished and cleaned up, the groups went down to the lake to swim. Hours went by. All 6 of us started to get along, and by the time we needed to return to the camp for dinner, we were all so exhausted we let the adult supervision teach us important facts along the way. Things like what poison ivy looks like, how to know if some wild animals are in the area, stuff that we should know, but was always good to be reminded even if summer wasn't for learning. Drew wanted us to roast hot dogs for our dinner. He was finding it difficult to light a fire using a flint kit. He wanted to teach us a new skill. After a few minutes of a pack of hungry girls complaining, he gave up, digging out the lighter instead. Stacy was our other supervisor. She was a pretty girl, only about 20. When you're 13, that seems pretty old. Her nails were painted cute colors that us girls loved. She didn't seem to be the outdoors type of girl. Drew might have had needed help keeping all the girls in check, and he had called in some backup. Drew was a youth pastor, and the church ran the camping trips. Even so, he didn't make us say grace before eating, or even any religious activities that he planned for us. He let us stuff ourselves, and when darkness came, We told some scary stories around the campfire. It was only 9 p.m. when he made all of us go to bed, but from the active day, our bodies felt like it was much later. Each of us went to our tents with almost no complaints about bedtime. I had fallen asleep very easily. Only an hour had passed before Katie had woke me up by nervously shuffling in her sleeping bag. "Are you all right?" I asked in a low whisper. "Sorry, did I wake you up?" she replied back in the dark. "Nah," I lied. I wondered if she needed to go to the washroom. A porta potty was set up pretty close by. "Do you need to go to the bathroom?" I asked her. I couldn't see her face in the dark. I rustled around looking for my flashlight. I didn't need to go, but I didn't mind walking down with her if she was scared. "Yeah, do you think that story Drew told us had any truth in it?" she had asked sheepishly. "The smiling man in the woods? Nah, he's making stuff up. If the woods were dangerous, our parents wouldn't let us go." I heard her head move against her sleeping bag, nodding at my words. Turning on the light, I helped her out of the tent for a quick bathroom run. Some giggling came from the tent besides us. Jane and Betty talked non-stop all day, and they might chat all night if someone didn't stop them. I was tempted to jump at their tent to scare them, but I left it alone. They would regret staying up all night tomorrow morning, and I didn't want to get in trouble for pulling a prank. And Katie was still scared. I took her hand and held the flashlight in the other. I even stood guard outside the porta potty while she took care of her business, just in case. Katie had older siblings, but I didn't. She seemed lonely and homesick already. I was trying my best to act like an older sister to comfort her. In the brush, I thought I saw yellow eyes flicker, looking at me. Shining the flashlight in the direction of the eyes, I saw nothing. Just forest animals wondering what we were doing. I was a little scared of coming across a bear or something along those lines. Ghost stories or crazed serial killers in the woods didn't scare me in that moment. The forest sounded like how a forest should at night. Spooky trees, creaking and all. Just as Katie came out ready to head back, a scream cutting through the night made us freeze in fear. It came from the direction of the camp. The low fire gave us enough light to sort of make out the tents, and a dark figure stalking around our campsite. Watching in horror, the figure went over to Drew's tent, ripped it open, and dragged Stacy out by the leg. I grabbed Katie, holding her close to me, terrified at what was going on. Stacy fought the figure with everything she had. She thrashed and tossed anything within arm's reach towards the figure's face. Drew came out of the tent, tackling the person or the thing off of her. Stacy got up and ran. At first I thought she had left everyone behind, but instead, she had found the axe for firewood, using it on her attacker. It was too much for me. I turned my head away, body shaking, unable to keep watching the horrible sight. Katie was crying as we held each other, waiting for an adult to come and tell us everything was alright. We had only been gone for a few minutes. How did everything go so wrong so fast? We both screamed when we heard footsteps come closer a few minutes later. Opening my eyes, I saw that it was Stacy, black staining her shirt. She smelled like 10-day-old rotting fish, and it made me gag. In her hand was the axe covered with more of that rancid-smelling black liquid. Betty and Jane beside her, holding each other while crying and shaking like me and Katie. "Come on, if we follow the trail, we'll hit Mr. Bobby's farmhouse. He has a phone," Stacy said, trying to sound strong, but her voice came out weak and shaking. "Where's Mr. Drew? And Nina and..." I started to say the other names of our missing campmates, but my throat closed up and only a sob came out. I knew what had happened to them. I just couldn't say it. They're gone. Come on. Using her free arm, Stacy scooped it up behind us to get us to start walking down the trail as fast as our small legs would carry us. Once we had started walking, Stacy kept both hands on the axe, and I was in front both hands on the flashlight, guiding her way as Katie kept her arms around my waist. Betty and Jane still sobbed behind us, no matter how hard they tried to choke it down. My hand shook. Every sound made me think something was just beyond the trees, waiting to jump out and take us. My eyes darted around, trying to see everything at once, making me dizzy. The farmhouse was a half-an-hour walk away at the best of times. Drew's car was closer, and I wondered why Stacy wasn't leading us there. I assumed Drew had his keys in him when the figure took him, or Stacy didn't want to stay at the camp long enough to find them. When you're so young and scared, you don't think about other escape plans. You only accept what the adult tells you. I got another whiff of the horrible, rotten fish smell when the wind shifted. And gagging and eyes watering, I refused to stop. Minutes passed and the smell decreased enough to make me stop choking on the bile rising in my throat. It was only then that I noticed Betty was the only one still sobbing. Stacy noticed it at the same time. We both turned to look, only seeing the small, brown-haired girl and Jane just gone without a trace. "Run!" Stacy's shout got us moving. She grabbed Betty roughly, dragging her along by the arm, the girl screaming in fear. Katie was the slowest of us. She was dragging behind me, but still, I kept one arm around her, trying my best to get her to go a little bit faster. When another dark shape came out of the trees directly in front of Stacy, she didn't stop. She let out a startled scream, swinging the axe at the figure's head. I saw a flash of glowing yellow eyes before hearing the awful crack of the axe connecting to its skull. It collapsed to the trail. Stacy wasted no time yanking the blade out that was stuck in the thing's skull. I shone my flashlight, trying to get a better look at the figure. Black blood like oil oozed from the head wound. The face was pitch black and dark with no nose, its skin so dark and wet looking. More of that smell came drifting over, causing Katie to start gagging this time. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. That much I knew. We didn't even have time to guess at what it was before another came out of the trees. Stacy clipped it with her axe, making it scream and dart away. She was breathing hard. If more of these things came to us, I didn't think that we would make it. Stacy was only one person, and she had to defend 3 scared girls. Even so, she looked ready to do it. Another creature came at us. Sadly, while Stacy was dealing with the first one, 2 more came. In seconds, they grabbed Betty, dragging her screaming into the woods. Stacy screamed and cursed at them, pain across her face that she didn't keep the girl safe. More and more of those creatures started to appear and poke their heads from the trees in front of us. She gave us a look. No words, just a look, and I knew what it meant and what to do. She ran towards the monsters, axe in hand, and me and Katie ran back down the trail towards the camp, knowing that we would never get past the wall of pitch-dark monsters. Stacy gave us some time and we weren't going to waste it. Running hard, Katie kept up with me, tears pouring down her face. I wanted to cry, but I knew if I gave into that, I wouldn't be able to keep going. Lungs burning, we ran until we saw the orange light of the fire. I planned to get the hot dog pokers or, well, anything I could use as a weapon. For half a second, I felt almost safe. Maybe if we found the keys, we could find a car and hide inside if we couldn't drive it. Maybe, just maybe, Stacy would get away and we could all go together. But all my hopes are crushed when Katie stumbled, falling hard. I was running so fast that I accidentally left her behind for a few paces before skidding to a stop to go back for her. A dark monster took it as a chance to swoop in, trying to drag her away. I went by Stacy's example. I let out a war cry that would have sounded funny in any other situation. Jumping on the creature's back, I hit it with my flashlight as hard as I could, as many times as I was able, aiming for its head. Our struggling only lasted a few seconds. I was tossed off its back, onto the hard ground. Looking at me with yellow eyes set in a dark face, it decided that we weren't worth it, and it sulked off. I had saved us for the moment. I needed to get Katie up and moving back into camp and to get a better weapon. My stomach turned when I looked at her. A long gash on her stomach was pouring blood onto the ground. I shook my head to clear it, refusing to give up. Grabbing her under the arms, I started to drag her back towards camp, and towards the dim orange light of the fire. I knew some basic first aid, but already was sure this was far beyond what I could help with. Leaving her behind was not an option just yet. Horrible wound or not, I needed to at least try and help her. I was sweating and panting by the time that I got her by the fire. I kept repeating how sorry I was that I needed to drag her, and hurting her while doing so. She was very brave, and kept her sobs very low for my sake. Digging around in Drew's ruined tent, I started to look for anything of use. Just normal camping gear, no weapons I could see, and no car keys. I grabbed the first aid kit, another flashlight, and some scissors. I was hoping to find a knife of some sort. No such luck. I avoided the other tents. I could smell the blood mixed in with the fishy rot, and I didn't want to know what horror waited for me on the inside. I tried cleaning Katie up a little, but was well over my head. I didn't want to hurt her by touching her too much. Seeing that amount of blood nearly made me sick. I didn't even know of the fact that I felt faint seeing blood until that point. I was so stressed that I wasn't even aware of someone walking up to our camp, until they were just outside the light of the fire. My body jolted into action as I grabbed these scissors in one hand and the hot dog stick in the other. The black, blood-soaked axe came into view, and for a brief moment I thought that Stacy had made it back. That was not the case. A man came into the light, dressed in baggy clothing that hung loose on his thin frame. Long straight white hair that was half-heartedly pulled back into a low ponytail, but most of it still stayed in his face, making it hard to see his features. "Who?" I choked. "Two left. Good for you." Ignoring me, he sat down next to the fire pit and started placing wood onto trying to get it going again. I was so shocked at his calm manner that I couldn't react. A soft cry from Katie brought me back to my senses. I need help. My friend is hurt, and there are things in the woods that are eating everyone. Stacy had the axe. Is she all right? Did you see her? Please, tell me something." "No. Please help Katie first. She's really hurt and I'm so scared. There's a lot of blood and I don't." Once the words had started, they just kept coming. They poured from me without any thought of what I was saying. I was having a meltdown. "Stop talking." His voice was so loud that it kept echoing through the woods for a few seconds. I wasn't frozen in fear by the sound, and dropped all my makeshift weapons. I had never had an adult just snap at me like he just did. A tense second passed between us. Rubbing his temple, I saw regret flood over his face from getting angry with me. It only lasted a second before he regained his tired, worn-out look. I went over to Katie about ready to burst from stress when he also came over. He held a hand over her wound. I looked in amazement as most of her blood just faded with a wave of his hand, and her gash closed a little. Not much, but it looked better than before. What? I asked in a very small voice, just in case he would yell again. With a long, suffering sigh, he went back to the fire, back turned to me. I have a migraine. Your friend may last through the night if she's lucky. What about Stacy? Did you see her? You don't need to worry about her anymore. His cold tone nearly brought me to tears. I wanted nothing more than to just start crying and shouting, but Katie still needed me. This man might be able to help us. Breaking down wouldn't help us get out of there. Glancing up, I saw yellow eyes in the dark and I trembled. The creature saw us, head poking out from the trees a few feet away, drool dripping from an open mouth of sharp teeth. When it saw the man next to the fire, its eyes widened in fear, and it darted back into the woods. Those monsters are scared of you, I stated after I saw the strange sight. Looking over his shoulder at me, his eyes narrowed. He didn't want to talk and he didn't want to hear me asking questions. Until I got some answers, one of those things was going to happen. I'm like their boss. They need to follow certain rules and they broke the first one. Only 7 of them should be in this area. It was 10, but I cut the number down as a punishment. I've killed the extras, so right now, 7 are in the woods, he explained. He sounded tired for how young he looked under his bleached white hair. I wondered if he was sick or something. The other rule is they can only kill 1 human per night. So 7 of them can kill 7 humans. So far, they've killed 6. My throat caught again. Gripping Katie's hand, I hope it comforted her enough to calm her down after hearing such news. We were the last 2 left of our group. Fear seeped into my bones, making me feel cold even as the flames started to rise in the fire pit. They can still kill 1 more, right? I asked hoarsely. He didn't reply. He only gave me another look over his shoulder to confirm the fact. Even after it sunk in, I felt a little sense of relief. The monsters wouldn't attack us. I could just stay there or around the man and be safe. Looking down at Katie, my hope fluttered away. Unless he could heal her more, there is a very big chance that she wouldn't make it through the night. I needed to get to the farmhouse and to a phone for help. Can you carry her for me? We need to get out of here. She'll die if I don't call someone to help her. And I can't go alone through those woods with those monsters. My voice started out strong, but soon it went back into a begging and pleading tone. I'm staying here all night. My head is killing me. My eyes darted to the axe, tempted to threaten him with it until he listened. If he could kill those monsters in the woods, I had no chance of getting him to go along with my plan. If I went, I might die before I got help. If I stayed, Katie might die before sunrise. The world was so unfair at that point. I held her hand so tight that it must have hurt my new friend, but she didn't complain. Stay here with me, Katie said finally in a weak voice. I looked down at her, really wanting nothing more than to do just that. Staying meant risking her life. I wondered if she was considering that when she had asked me. She might have just wanted someone to be by her side while she was scared and in pain. Please, can't you heal her? I begged once again. I've done as much as I can. It's not my job to help out humans. I don't care which one of you lives. Only that those creatures don't break their last rule, and I'm forced to kill them. You should kill them all. They killed... I couldn't get the words out. I thought of Stacy and Drew and the girls that I spent the day with. They were gone and there was nothing I could do about it, aside from hate the ones who had done it. It's just their nature. Although that fact might be impossible for humans to understand. You have been on top of the food chain for so long. You think it's a tragedy when one of you dies, when in any other species, it's just how life is. My gut stirred with a white-hot rage. I wanted to attack the man in front of us, whoever he was. I knew giving into my emotions wouldn't help. I just let myself cry, and held Katie's hand hoping it felt like she had a sibling with her in that moment. I knew what my decision was, and I needed to get all the crying out before I followed through on it. You could kill her, you know. That way you would. I didn't let him finish. I tossed whatever was close to me at his head. He raised a hand to deflect the attack, making these scissors flying off into the darkness. I thought he would be angry at me, but he just looked at me, a little stunned by my reaction. I'm not killing her. Katie's a sweet girl who is going to live a long life and do so many good things. She's not dying tonight, and I'm making sure of that. Standing up, I went over to the axe, wrapping a hand that could barely fit around the handle. It was heavy for me, but I would need to manage. Rubbing the tears from my eyes, I looked around for the flashlight, ready to leave to the farmhouse. Grabbing it, ready to go, the man stopped me by standing in my way. What's your name? He asked, and it made me stop and blink. Savannah. I told him, not knowing why he had asked. I'm Liren. I'll give you a little bit of help. Earring. I had misheard his name. No, never mind. Let me borrow the axe. I pulled it away from him defensively. I didn't want to trust him after he had treated us, but didn't have any other option. Letting him take the axe, he held it in one hand. In the other, he ran a fingernail across his thumb, hard enough to make it bleed. Pressing the thumb to the axe, the wood faded, turning into a solid silver. The black blood disappeared off the weapon, until it was pure and glittering in the dark. When he gave it back to me, I found the now silver axe, light enough for my small body to handle. This is all I can do. You have to fight through this on your own. You may have a weapon now to increase your chances, but don't get cocky out there. And I know this is hard to ask, but please, don't kill those monsters if you don't need to. I don't like it when my creatures have senseless deaths. Killing for food is one thing, but gripping the new weapon in one hand, I found it suddenly very heavy. Liren, whoever he was, cared about these creatures. He didn't want them to die if he could help it. He must have had a rough time being the one to kill them when they had broke their rules. No wonder why he looked so tired and pained. I nodded at him and looked over at Katie. She still hadn't sat up. I wasn't even sure if she was aware of what was going on. If I died and she lived, she would never forgive me for leaving her. I just needed to make it for her sake. Giving them both one last look, I ran off back down the trail, new flashlight guiding my way. I didn't know where the farmhouse was, but I remembered hearing I just needed to follow the trail out and I would see it. I used up a lot of my strength running for a few minutes. Forcing to pace myself, I slowed down while looking out for yellow eyes in the dark, not feeling safe in the slightest. Shortly, I passed the spot where Stacy had made her last stand. Tears threatened to make me stop. I didn't see any traces of her, only the bodies he had left behind. Stepping around these scattered remains, I breathed through my mouth, trying to get over the smell. When I get a few feet away from the area, I heard a crunchy noise behind me. Turning and shining my flashlight back, I gasped, seeing 4 creatures in the middle of the trail. Long fingers snatching up pieces of the fallen, and sharp teeth tearing apart the dark flesh. They looked at me, but they didn't stop eating. If the 4 stayed there, I only had 3 more to worry about somewhere in the woods. And quickening my pace, I went on. Every sound put me on edge. Sniffing the air to see if I could smell if any more of those monsters were coming close to me. 10 minutes passed without any issues. I thought that I saw some yellow eyes watching in the woods, but they didn't approach. The silver axe might be keeping them away. After all, they had the bodies of my campmates and their fallen to eat. Why go for someone with a weapon when they had some free meals all over the place? I thought I was in the clear when a figure came out of the trees, stopping right in front of me. I knew which one this was. It was the one that had hurt Katie, and the one that I had smashed my flashlight on. One eye was closed and the other looked at me with such hate. I knew that he wanted to eat my guts for the damage that I had done to it before. It bolted towards me before I could move. A clawed arm grabbed my shirt, lifting me up just as I swung the axe down into its shoulder. Letting out a scream, it tore the axe out, tossing it aside. And then, for some reason, it tossed me as well. I sat up, feeling bruised, to see where I had struck it. The wound was burning and flaking the dark skin. I scrambled in a panic to get to where my axe was. Without any rational thought, I darted off into the woods, with the thing screaming, following behind. I dropped my flashlight and I ran blind into the woods, without any idea of what I was doing. I should have stayed on the path, but it was too late for that now. The thing was chasing me, wanting to kill me. It was injured, but I still didn't have much of a chance against it. I ran, feeling as if my legs would give up on me at any moment. Tears stung my eyes, and branches cut my face. But I still ran for Katie's sake. The thing behind me stopped screaming, but I knew it was still after me. My heart leapt into my throat when I thought that I saw something in front of me through the trees. A beam of light moving, confusing me on what it could be. Over my own breathing, I didn't hear any of the noises, but my brain clicked into the fact that I had just seen some car headlights. I was near a road. I ran, chest threatening to burst. I tripped over a branch and rolled into the ditch alongside the road that I was so thankful for. Every muscle screamed at me as I got up and crawled out of the ditch towards the highway. It was late, but I knew this was a popular route for truckers. One would stop for me if someone would just please drive by. When I stood, it felt like I had twisted my ankle. I dragged my body, almost passing out from the effort. Axe still in hand, I looked up and down the road frantically. A blow to my back tossed me rolling into the middle of the lane. I gasped for air and stared at the monster that had just kicked me aside. My axe dropped too far for me to reach in time. It got on all fours, blood pouring from its wounded shoulder. I stared in horror, knowing this was the end, and for just to wait for it to come at me. Its yellow eyes glaring, and it let out a loud scream of hate at me as it dug its claws into the ground, ready to pounce. I couldn't move my ragged body, and I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed right back at it. Getting up on one elbow, I emptied out my lungs in a screech. That made the thing not only stop from attacking me, but take a step back. We both stared each other down for a few seconds. Those few seconds might have saved my life. A blaring truck horn came from down the road. The creature looked over, seeing a transport truck coming right at it. Giving me one last look, it skittered back off into the woods. The next few hours were a muddled, frantic blur I still don't fully remember to this day. The driver stopped to get me off the road and down to the farmhouse and to a phone. He went with the farmer into the woods to check on Katie, while I stayed at the house with the farmer's wife, going between crying and sleeping. Morning came around when I woke up. Dragging my tired body to the porch, I saw emergency crews scattered on the driveway and officers going onto the trail. Someone told me that Katie was already on the way to the hospital, and they let me sit on a chair on the porch until another ambulance came for me. I sat watching everyone run around, trying to get a search started for the missing girls and Drew. I didn't know why no officers started to question me yet. I might have looked too out of it to be of any help. Someone did sit beside me to talk with me though. I wasn't expecting so many of you to make it. Laren sat next to me, silver axe resting against the wooden rocking chair that he was in. I wanted to speak, but I was too tired to say anything. I'm taking this axe with me. No offense, it's too powerful to leave it with you. Unless you want my job. Pardon? I asked, directing my head towards him, trying to see if he was joking. Kings only last for 10 years. More if they're really strong. They need to switch bodies before it breaks down. I've been doing this job for 5, and I would like to pass the crown on to someone else. It's too tiresome. I don't know why I agreed to doing this in the first place. It's also too much of a bother to set up tests for other candidates, so I'm just asking anyone who survives a supernatural encounter if they want the gig. I stared at him, not believing the words coming out of his mouth. I didn't want to come across another monster or creature of the dark ever again, so having his job was way out of the question. This guy really needed to get some standards too. He was asking a 13-year-old girl to take over such an important position. How lazy could one person be? If I could move, I would punch you for asking. I heard a small sound that was almost a laugh from him. I should have expected that answer. At least you don't need to worry about monsters bothering you again. Any king candidates are off limits. If you weren't one, you're guaranteed to be killed by something supernatural someday, because you encountered some. But I refused. I started and shutting up too late. That doesn't matter. You're still an honored human the king recognized. If you don't want my job, you can become a knight. It would mean you would turn into some sort of creature, but you wouldn't be under such strict rules about protecting humans as I am. Your friend Katie accepted the offer to turn when she's 18. I shot my head up. Katie agreed to be turned into something horrible, like those things that attacked us. Like the things that killed everyone right in front of us. My knee-jerk reaction was anger, but the reason why she would agree to such a thing came to mind. She was hurt badly, nearly died and powerless to help me as I risked my life to save her. She might have wanted to get some sort of strength to ensure that she never felt like that again. You don't need to answer right away. Heck, You can ask to become a knight or the next king right before your death. So, just let it stay in the back of your mind. He stood up from the chair, with the axe over his shoulder and he stretched. I'm leaving and I hope I never see you again. It wasn't the nicest of goodbyes, but I appreciated the thought behind it. Standing up, I was ready to talk to the cops even though I didn't have a good story for them. I stopped when Liren looked over towards the trail and gave a small, impressed whistle. Looks like I miscounted last night. What an embarrassing mistake. What I saw made me run past him and down the dirt driveway. Stacy was on the trail, coming out of the woods, being guided by officers wrapped in a blanket. She looked beat up but was still alive and walking. I didn't care about supernatural kings or knights. I only cared about getting to Stacy and hugging her for fighting so hard to save us. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. I've been trying to save some money for a while, but it seemed like my bank account was stuck. Thankfully, I heard about Rocket Money and gave it a try. Turns out that I had a bunch of subscriptions that I was paying for that I had forgotten about. Rocket Money helped me cancel some of them, and now I'm finally starting to see my account balance go up. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over all my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. I love how the dashboard shows me this month's spending compared to last month, so I can clearly see my spending habits. Plus, they'll help me create a custom budget and keep my spending on track. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things that you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. That's rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. rocketmoney.com/MrCreeps. Her locket is small, slippery, a thin chain like sewing thread and a clasp for nimble, patient fingers. I could never hope to open any part of it now. My hands shake, my scrub, delicate little filigree, an anatomical heart, golden copper, and blood. Inside, there's a picture of her, May, opposite a picture of us, all smiling, all happy, all alive. For a while, I thought that I had survivor's guilt. I read about it, searching for someone else's tidy words for how I felt. PTSD with one measure of empathy and another of overthinking. A vestige of these horrible acts originally. I should have, and why didn't I, at their most insidious? But I don't feel guilty, not really. I feel lonely and I feel afraid. I still feel afraid. I did blame myself for what happened at one point. I had been drinking a lot. Maybe if I hadn't been, I would have noticed something, taken the signs more seriously. But I guess that we had all been drinking. We felt safe. 3 friends camping. Normal. May was supposed to move to Philly for a job that you couldn't stop her from smiling about. She was proud, excited, finally a bona fide adult at 28. Peter and I were happy for her. We were. And our weekend was supposed to be a last hurrah. But she was leaving and our trio was going to be different. Less fun and spontaneous and more grown up. Peter's wife, Corinne, was pregnant, so that would have forced a change too. But they had been trying for a while, so May and I had gotten used to the idea of being a spiritual aunt and uncle. Peter's baby would eventually learn to make cocktails, and we would invite the little thing into our group as an apprentice. Corinne wasn't thrilled when I planned aloud. But eventually she laughed, despite herself. Peter laughed more. Infectiously big and thunderous, a husky laugh that could shake the shadows from the corners of a room and make you wonder how you ever had felt crappy in the first place. Man, I miss that. I need that. He had one of those laughs the first night as May frowned indignantly and I smiled over one of my several whiskeys. He had brought a Tupperware for something that he had called Cherokee stew for dinner. May was giving him a woke earful about appropriation, and Peter had made a joke about possibly being part Cherokee. They fought like friends, a stupid, circular argument, goading but drinking all the while. Eventually Peter said that May didn't have to eat it, that she could have trail mix or a granola bar. Oh, I'm gonna eat it, because unlike your pasty butt, I am part Cherokee. Silence. I laughed first, and then Peter, and then all of us, and then... Whoa, what the heck was that? Peter's eyes lost their twinkle. We had all heard it. A shriek in the darkness, piercing and desperate. I don't know, it sounded like a... I second-guessed myself, not wanting to ruin the mood, but May was happy to oblige. "Oh, woman, what do we do?" We waited a moment and listened. Nothing but the chirp of crickets and the crackle of logs. Maybe it's just kids, Peter offered as solemn and hopeful. She, whatever it was, it didn't say help, right? May was tense, searching the air with her ear the way that a deer might. Yeah, but would someone really scream, help? Or would they just scream? Well, we don't really even know if it was a someone, do we? I mean, we could call the cops, but... May seemed to turn my suggestion over in her mind. No, you're right. They wouldn't do anything anyway. It did sound a lot like a woman though, didn't it? Peter and I shared a discussion and a glance. It did. It totally did. But she's alright, right? Yeah, absolutely. Maybe she got tickled or something. Corinne shrieks when she gets tickled. You see, it could be anything, it's fine. Yeah, right. Look, May, if we hear it again, well, I don't know, go look or something. But for now, I don't hear anything. Do you? I tried to be diplomatic, but it was late and dark, and we were drunk and comfortable by the fire. May nodded, shook it off, and chuckled uneasily. More bourbon for your nerves, milady. Peter shook the bottle. Yeah, thanks, Pete. We didn't hear a thing after that, just mental echoes of a scream. A short scream, a long one, painful and joyous. An hour later, we were eating s'mores, playing drinking games, and the scream had become a dozen different, vaguely plausible memories. By midnight, we were all in our tents, in our sleeping bags, separate rooms in the quiet cacophony of an uncertain wilderness. A rustle of leaves, the groan of a maple tree, the thrum of my drunken pulse, footsteps, the synthetic squeak of my sleeping bag, a cleared throat, a snore, a distant scream, another, a bad dream of fearful nothing, and then sleep. The next day came cool and gray with Peter humming along to a Bluetooth speaker and May clutching a cup of coffee, pretty and bundled and drawn. How'd you sleep? I croaked at her. Oh, good, just hungover. She smiled meekly and eclipsed her face behind her mug. Yeah, I'm with you, I commiserated. Hair the dog? May declined, rubbed asleep from her heavy eyes. Peter, annoyingly chipper, lifted a bottle and eyed it flirtatiously against the low morning light. Mac, I'll join you, Jack. A little Irish coffee, Kentucky. Sounds like a grand way to start the day. Peter must have slept well. He had the inevitable habit of turning a gut full of liquor into a head full of energy. He had been that way at 25 and at 30. He hadn't changed. He was a little just rounder around the belly and decidedly more bearded. May and I soaked miserably in contrast, slouching and moaning over our headaches as Peter merrily sang bluegrass in a terrible falsetto. He was cooking sausage into scrambled eggs in a cast iron skillet. Being a dad for us misanthropic kids, he had always been that too. Our gregarious anchor, warm and happy. May was conscientious and a bit of a downer, though I say that as lovingly as I can. Without her, Peter and I would have devolved into sloppy, self-indulgent men long ago. Insufferable and perhaps more free but less happy. It was May that badgered Peter into first talking to Corinne as he pined pitifully across the crowded bar. She was loving in a brutal sort of way, and she wasn't shy about being blunt. "I gotta piss. You lousy weirdos keep your eyes on the fire," she said, standing. "Maybelline, I'm a married man," Peter answered, full of false indignation. "I've seen more women peeing than I could ever need, or want." She chuckled and turned to me, narrowing her eyes accusatory. "Don't shame me, May. You're better than that," I smirked. She seethed, and then we laughed and she disappeared, grumbling theatrically. A moment later, I filled Peter's melodic calm with what seemed like a neurosis. "Hey, Peter, this is gonna sound crazy, but after we turned in last night..." "I heard it too, man," he said, turning the sausages. "I called the ranger station before you and May woke up. No one's missing, but they said to keep an eye out." He was staring then, no longer smiling, pensive. It made me feel oddly settled, and then I thought, "You're gonna be a good dad, Peter." "Yep, I know." He sipped at his cup. "I've been watching Bluey, this Australian cartoon about dogs. I've been taking notes." He never showed a hint of trepidation about becoming a father. No doubts, he had things figured out. And now I hoped that we could give May some peace of mind when she got back. I was sure that she had heard the screams too. Her face said as much. But when she had returned to camp, she looked frantic. She tore open our bag of food and started rummaging. "Where are the marshmallows?" "Oh, snack attack, I like it." "No, Peter, where are they? Did one of you finish them last night?" I shrugged and Peter shook his head. May looked pale. "What is it?" I asked. "What's wrong?" "Well, you have to come see." She grabbed my arm and I followed and stumbled through brush and stopped at a nearby clearing. I saw what she was raving about. Marshmallows scattered across the ground, crawling with ants. Gross, I guessed, but not worth the worry. There was something else, the screams maybe, but something more too. "I think they're ours," May whispered. "Okay, so we've got a raccoon problem. We'll be more careful, it's not a big..." "Jack, they're arranged. I mean, am I crazy?" I didn't get that at first, but when she said it, I saw it. They were laid out like stick fingers, kind of. Maybe not. "Hey, if this is about those screams last night, Peter called the ranger station. They said that nobody's gone missing. No one has reported anything. It was probably just some kids messing around. So why are you so..." "There are 3 stick figures, 3 people like us. And it's not just the screams, okay? Well, maybe it is, but now this." "May, it's nothing. They look a little like people, but I think you're seeing shapes in the clouds. There's probably little raccoon teeth marks on them or something. Look." I grabbed a stick from the ground, skewered one of these swarming white globs and lifted it. And the rest lifted with it. One of the people. The stick figure sagged, the marshmallows settled, and I saw a string running through them. Ruddy red twine. An armature. Jack, what the heck? I dropped it. I don't know. Someone did that, made these. Came into our camp last night, and why? What does it mean? I don't know, nothing. Peter said that hikers come through this area occasionally. Maybe one of them decided to play a prank, I don't know. As unsettled as we might have been, Peter was nonplussed by the news. He said that somebody might have pilfered our camp, that it was odd but not unheard of, and that they were gone now. Obnoxious, but somebody's harmless fun. After Blair Witch, everybody became an amateur horror set designer. They spooked you, mission accomplished. But if it makes you feel any better, May, the greatest threats to you out here aren't people. They're falls, dehydration, Lyme disease. Heck, you're actually a lot more likely to be killed at home than you are out in the woods. May nodded thinly. I made her a stiff coffee and she accepted my offer this time. We ate and planned our day. Enough distraction to catch a laugh or two. And then we packed our bags and doused the fire. May conceded that she might have been overreacting. The stress of moving, she had confessed. The uncertainty of a new life in a new place was all beginning to boil over. We did our best to reassure, said nice things and made promises. By the end of the day, she was smiling and teary and Peter had moved our discussion to a quarry for the day. Peter's uncle had owned the land where we had set up camp, 100 or so acres of low mountain wilderness, with a working tree farm at its eastern edge. Pretty rugged country that Peter had been roaming since he was a kid. And we'd been before to camp, but never to a place that he mysteriously called Xanadu. It was a special place, a hot spring, technically sitting on national park land, but close enough to feel like ours. An autumn oasis in the woods, hard to find, not on any maps. He made it sound like a slice of bliss, and May and I were primed to think with anything but misplaced fear. Before long, we were excited. We had a purpose and adventure, and an hour later we found ourselves at the base of a sloping climb. One overgrown switchback slithering upward through skinny pines. We were so enthralled by everything, the energy, the wilds that dripped with austere beauty, that we almost missed him sitting there amongst the shrubs. A boy who blended into the gray and brown, still dressed in a uniform that might have belonged to a Boy Scout troop. Something normal enough to forgive the oddity of his presence. He was young, maybe 10 or 12 years old. I've never been great at guessing ages. And he was ratty, dusted in dirt, alone and almost smiling. And Peter became immediately paternal. He bombarded the kid with questions. Was he okay? How did he get there? Did he need help? Food, water? Where were his parents? The boy was strange, ragged and aloof, answering Peter's questions only exactly as they were asked. He was okay. He walked there. He didn't need help, or food or water. His father was up in the mountain. His mother was in the ground. And he said it just like that. Mama's in the ground. It was unsettlingly matter-of-fact coming from a child. No sorrow or happy pretense about heaven. Flat. Peter brushed it off and kept interrogating. Do you want to come with us? No. Why'd your old man leave you here? To talk to the park ranger. And the ranger's up the mountain. Yes. Maybe it's about the scream. May cut in. Crap, I thought we had gotten past that. And I didn't want to. Yes. The boy lifted a backpack from his feet and clutched it to his chest. So you heard it too. Do you know what happened? May seemed more curious than overwrought. A small improvement. The boy opened his mouth and paused. I have charms. Do you want to buy one? Unexpected. Charms. May screwed up her face, confused. She was certainly not alone in that, but I didn't want more worry. So I tried to steal back some of Peter's morning positivity. "Sure," I responded. "How much?" The boy smiled. $5. I had the cash, so why not? Suddenly, he seemed excited and talkative. The charms were really talismans, he explained. They were magic. He made them to protect himself from bad things. Sometimes they worked, and now he made them for everyone. Everyone deserved protection. His mama taught him how to make them, but she didn't have one when she... He stopped, snatched away my money and reached into his bag. Charms, talismans, a rodent skull, a couple of ribs, and a few glittery plastic beads, all joined together with a shabby little macrame lanyard made of ruddy and red twine. "Hey kid," I started. "I don't mean to." "I've got to go," he interrupted. "Not supposed to talk to strangers, I forgot. Don't tell my daddy, okay?" Peter was frowning, eyeing the kid, concerned. May still looked confused. "Yeah, sure thing," I said, uneasy. "But you're sure that you're all right?" His nose had started running. He wiped it with his hand, painting dirt across his face. "Yes, I have merit badges, always prepared, always okay. Don't tell, though, if you see him. I'll get in trouble." He smiled awkwardly, stood and shouldered his backpack, and he started walking away. We let him go, even as a mental argument raged on Peter's face, and I kicked myself for not asking about the marshmallow effigies. If only afterward that I mentioned the color of the twine, the similarity. May swallowed whatever nascent misgivings she had, turned to resolve instead. "I forget it, weird kid, I don't know. Can we just go to this Xanadu place?" Peter nodded grimly. He led the way up the mountain into a pool nestled in a bowl of bald rock and gold-leafed birches. The water steamed ghostly and inviting, and all of the morning seemed soothed away by the warmth of it. We sat in silence for a while, May close to me as Peter reclined opposite of us. "It's funny," he said finally. What is?" I asked. Nothing. Just wonder why you two never, I looked at May, who caught my eye and flicked her vision back to Peter. "Ah, you're shipping us?" she asked, blushing despite her sarcasm. "You look good together is all." "Oh, Peter's congratulating himself for picking attractive friends," I quipped. "Well, I didn't hang out with you two because you're nice." May splashed Peter and he laughed, ducked beneath the water. May shrieked as he got one of her feet and kicked at Peter, chirped for help and laughed. I grabbed her to keep her from going under, felt the pretty warmth of her. Gosh dang it, Peter. When he surfaced, he was laughing more, and then he stopped. "Oh, hi." May and I turned around and saw a pair of boots, drab khaki trousers, and a green jacket embroidered with a badge. "Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you." His jacket said R. Brooks across the chest. The park ranger that the boy's father was talking with, I'd guessed. He was youngish and clean-shaven, a pleasant smile playing across his face. "Something wrong, officer? Because look, I've been coming to this spring since I was a kid and I've never..." "Oh, no, you're fine." He stared down at Peter and loomed above us. "I'm looking for someone. A Boy Scout because we saw him not too long ago." "A Boy Scout, maybe." Peter rose from the water, grabbed a towel, waved May and I down as we began to rise with him. "I think I can show you where we saw him from the overlook," Peter offered. The ranger's smile never wavered. His expression didn't change. He just said, "Okay." A moment later, May leaned toward me and whispered, "I didn't hear that guy walk up. Maybe he's a ghost." "You think they would let him retire at least?" Unfinished business. You can't ask for better job security. May chuckled and then after a while said, "Hey, what Peter said. He's an idiot. A hopeless romantic. He owns a copy of the Notebook in hardback, you know." She grinned. "Oh, did he borrow it from you?" "I would never give my copy away." May was close, very close. Brown eyes and wet hair. "He is an idiot." "Uh-huh." Whatever I might have wanted in that moment, it didn't happen. Peter came back. May pulled her legs off of mine and gave Peter a "don't start" kind of look. Peter shrugged. "So I asked him about the screams last night, and he said that it was foxes." "Foxes?" May asked. "Yep. Apparently they scream like women." Google seemed to agree. Super weird, I know, but yeah. I watched May's brow unknit. "Oh, weird, okay. And the kid?" "I don't know. The ranger didn't talk to anyone on the way up. No dad. But he is with a search and rescue apparently, and they don't have a missing kid on their radar. Pretty sure they would." Peter chuckled. "Guy told me some crazy stories about the job though." Peter promised to regale us around the campfire later on, and an hour or two later we were on our way back to camp, feeling lighter, singing, joking, laughing as the sun sunk low and cast our final mile in long shadows. May was the first to see camp. "Oh, what the heck?" All of our things, coolers, bags and boxes, pans and plastic cups, everything but the tents were all arranged in a circle around a gray-brown lump on the ground. I shined a flashlight as May reached down for the lump, and then she yelped, "Ugh, bugs." It was a dead raccoon, an old, deflated mass of matted fur, hollow eye sockets, a muzzle clean to the bone. "If this was that weird kid," May grumbled. She was livid, seething, tearing around our camp and searching. And we checked for missing things. Nothing gone as best as we could tell. A bit of strangeness made somehow expected weight against everything else. Once the raccoon was buried and out of sight, May began drinking in earnest. Peter lit up a joint and I cooked hot dogs on skewers as a shared silence began to fall. We fought against the unease. I tried to joke about it. But then as night settled, Peter made good on his promise to tell us about the ranger's stories. He was clearly having fun with it, adding little embellishments, pausing dramatically. A doormat at the edge of a cliff with a single pair of empty boots. An abandoned school bus where every seat was covered in what looked like human bite marks. A missing couple's camera showing their last few days alive. Okay, that one seems tragic, but creepy. May was getting into the stories. It wasn't creepy until Ranger Brooks started noticing something in the photos. 2 eyes in the distance, a figure among the trees. There were 4 days of pictures in that camera, and in almost every one, a mountain lion hiding in the background. They didn't notice. Search and rescue never found the bodies. "Yeah, well, screw that," May shouted. "Nope, nope, nope." Peter turned in early in the night and told us to look through our photos just in case. He smirked and May threw something, and then we were alone, drinking, playing truth or dare and feeling the conspiratorial pull of a possibly bad decision. "Jack, it's your turn." "Truth. Oh, you wimp. Okay, let's see. Earlier today when Peter said, well, about us, what was your first thought?" I watched her watching me close. Her truth was a dare, wasn't it? I leaned into her and made a possibly bad decision, one that I could blame on the whiskey, one that she had reciprocated. And then for a moment, we weren't friends. We were whispering in my tent, taking off clothes and trying and failing to be as quiet as we erased the day with something that felt inevitable. Afterwards, we lay, cramped enough to still feel intimate, a tangle of limbs soft and affectionate. I kissed along her chest and stopped at the locket that I had given her for Christmas years before. Something delicate that looked something brutalistic from a distance. Like her. The sound of our breathing, the wind outside the tent, the crickets, the snap of a twig, an uneasy silence and a dozen little thoughts to fill it. Now the stories were getting to me, I reckoned, crowding out the notion that I had just gotten with a friend was something less complicated. A touch of fear growing. But we were alone, safe, and as I reached for the tent zipper, May reached for me and asked what I was doing. "No, it's nothing. Just paranoid. I just need to." I unzipped the door. Opening the flap, I gasped. May screamed and scrambled for the fabric to cover herself. I backpedaled away from the door. The boy stared. "Oh, what the heck? What do you... Get out of our camp!" He was inches away from the tent, crouched and leering, unmoving, silent. "Kid, get lost, Jesus." His eyes moved from me to May. He inhaled a long breath and spoke. "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." I heard the zipper of Peter's tent. May was shouting, swearing. I was paralyzed, watching the boy's lips wordlessly mouth. "If I should die before I wake, I pray the..." He stopped. Eyes went wide and he screamed. Peter came running. The boy was faster as he darted off into the woods. May shook, hugged her arms around me as I tried to grasp for one normal thought. "Oh, okay." Peter, flashlight in hand, shielding his eyes from two naked friends. "Try not to look, but guys, what the heck was that thing?" I searched for clothes in the shadows, reliving the moment of the boy's scream. Not scared or angry, alarming, shrill, and feral shriek. The kid," I stammered. "He was right outside my tent." "That was the kid? The Boy Scout?" Peter barked, incredulous. "I thought that it was an animal. He ran away on all fours, Jesus." I was glad that I hadn't seen that, but the image still crept into my mind. The boy ambling away, wild limbs bent in the wrong places. Peter searched the woods attentively as I tried to convince May and myself that the boy was harmless. He was just a kid. Weird, but not threatening. Peter lent me his knife after we had settled down. A security blanket I wondered if I could ever bring myself to actually use. He said that he would call the ranger station again in the morning. May slept with me in my one-person tent. Uncomfortable, lovely, warm. Whimpering in her sleep as I tried to slow my thoughts. Eventually, I must have slowed them enough to drift off. I awoke in the morning alone in my tent. Peter was talking to someone in an officious tone outside. "Well, take your time then, I guess. Thanks." A pause. Unbelievable. When I joined them, May half smiled at me. Better than avoiding eye contact. Something that I had fretted over on top of everything else. "What's going on?" I asked groggily. Peter huffed and unscrewed the cap of a fresh bottle of whiskey. Bottle shop wanted 500 extra to come out here on short notice. 500? What the heck is happening to the world? The auto shop. May sighed. The truck won't start. Probably that kid. I was wanting to get out of Dodge, but... Yeah, what about the kid? The ranger station. They didn't pick up, Peter responded, abandoning the pretense of boozy coffee. He pulled straight from the bottle and May beckoned for him to share. Anyway, nothing weird this morning apart from the truck. "Oh, good, I guess. And Peter, about last night." His scowl thawed into a mischievous grin. "Last night?" "Oh, for Pete's sake," May cut in, shaking off the chill of the liquor. "He obviously knows that we weren't having a naked hang, Jack. We screwed. Peter and I. I'm going to choose not to feel weird about it. I'm gonna drink. And Jack, we're not gonna do it again. Unless we do, in which case, you aren't gonna let me feel weird about it, either of you." "Modern women," Peter answered, amused. "I dig it. But Jack, and I say this as a friend, you get around a ton, and I'm shaming you." "Oh, screw off," I laughed. "Shame, shame." I turned to May, feeling more okay. "You're not going to defend me?" "No, I agree with Peter." "Shame." It didn't get weird, it got easy, and somehow the day became normal. We played cards, we drank, we made up stories about the boy. Clearly he had been raised by wolves, stolen from some Boy Scout troop and left to learn wolf culture and woodland handicrafts. May suggested that the glittery plastic beads on his charm talisman thing were a part of an even greater mystery. You know, Lisa Frank went missing in these woods a while back. No one found her. They assumed it was a photogenic mountain lion, but that mountain lion lawyered up, maintained his innocence, never had enough to charge him. She spoke with absolute conviction. Peter tried to look somber. I smiled. Lisa Frank, the Unicorn Notebook Company. She was more than her products, Jack. May said, deadpan, flirting with condescension. Peter drizzled a bit of bourbon on the ground. Thug heaven is always so greedy. Lisa Frank. Thug heaven. Man, we lost it. We laughed more and more, cackling maniac laughter that felt so easy. May kissed me as Peter left us for a moment, giddy and effortless, lips like a memory. And then she looked at me as if searching for an exit door in my mind, quizzical and earnest. I gave her my contented vacancy in return. Afterwards, we didn't talk about her leaving, didn't talk about feelings, we reveled, made all of our misgivings into something ephemeral and endlessly unimportant. The day dragged comfortably. The branches sagged overhead, drowsy and nearly bare, leaves falling, tickling disjointed seconds away. At one point, Peter had called Corinne. We howled at her, to her, a pack of drunken idiots waiting for the normal world outside of our camp to return. And Peter didn't tell her much. She seemed happy. And then dusk fell, and 100 shadows reached from distant trees. That evening, we tried to make up ghost stories around the campfire, doubling down on our effort to control our smothered unease. The fear of the stories was ours, something narrative and expected, grim and grisly, but still lighter than the unknowable dark mustering beyond the firelight. I got up to pee once, staggered out, clumsy and babbling to myself. I must have put down my cup, though I don't remember. I remember the sloshing jerk of the trees around me. I remember thinking of my two friends. I drank more and started to feel wrong. My body hummed, drooping and sickly receding into the gravity of my chair. "Jack, you okay?" No, yeah. I've just got to lie down for a bit." I was in my tent, fumbling with the zipper, cold, shivering and sinking into the ground. I heard laughter, Peter's warm bellow, and then nothing. A cold tent painted in silence. The firelight was gone and my sleeping bag was hungry, digesting me as a mountain lion's prowled outside, and the tent breathed a languorous rhythm. "Jack, is that you?" Whispered distant phantom words. A dream, a shriek, a muffled sound. The hush of leaves. "Somebody, please." The groan of heavy, naked limbs. An echoed laugh. A scream, guttural and wet. A quickened pulse, thumping, pounding. The rhythmic slap of flesh. Another scream. Another. The whine of a zipper. Nothing. And then everything again and again, until the sounds became meaningless. I woke the next morning to barbaric light and a splitting headache. And silence. I waited, burying my dream from the night before, or at least trying to. It was foxes again, I told myself. Drunken, screaming fox dreams. That's all. I went to May's tent first and called her name, unzipped her door. Empty. She wasn't there. She had gone for a hike, gone for kindling, gone to breathe the mountain air, the scent of pine and moss. She'd be right back. When Peter didn't answer either, I felt relieved. It meant that they were together. I had been foolish, drunk and anxious, nothing more. I unzipped Peter's tent. I hadn't noticed his boots sitting side by side, tucked underneath his rainfly, but I felt the vertigo, an illusory cliff. I had fooled myself into seeing a doormat, and I looked no further. Peter. My voice carried, echoed off the tree trunks, and died in a whimper. Peter was there, pale skin, swimming in blood. Too much. His belly was ragged, a dozen clotted punctures, 100 too many. His eyes were open, staring, as if lost in a thought that I couldn't fathom. The screams had been real. Not foxes, a friend dying badly as I spun drunkenly into sleep. And that meant May. She wasn't there. Hers was the first voice I remembered as the silence in the night became something horrific. Jack, is that you? I felt sick. Where was she? Was she afraid, dead, or worse? I had no way to know. Only a multitude of half-certainties. Vague images of anguish hidden amidst the voyeuristic pines. It took hours to hike to the nearest ranger station. Quiet time to think ruefully and see her face in every distant clearing. A ranger named Jansen told me that they hadn't received a call from Peter. Not after the first night and not after the second. I told her about the kid, about Ranger Brooks and every detail that I could remember. Brooks? There is no Brooks that works in the park. I tried to remember his face, but I couldn't. It blended indistinctly with something plausible but far from firm. Even now, I search my memory for that face, but nothing. The following day, I was told that the likely motivation for Peter's death was money. His wallet was missing and so was mine. I'll admit it is strange that that's all they took. Jansen's boss said those words so easily. It was Jansen who recognized the pain in my eyes and returned it with sympathy. That's all they took. May was still missing, a hole in me that grew with each passing day. And I was the one who told Corinne about Peter. I told her over the phone and listened to her break after the disbelief bled out of her. She loved Peter, and Peter was going to be a good dad, a perfect dad. I wanted to see that so badly. But as Corinne wept and asked her questions, all I could tell her was that I don't know. Why would they kill him? I don't know. Did he make someone mad? I don't know. Who did it? I don't know. Why did they let you go? That question bothered me for a long time. Why did they let me go? I wasn't special, I wasn't pure, I was chosen. After describing my recollection of that night to the Rangers, they sent me to the hospital for a drug screening. By then, my blood alcohol was 0. I tested positive for cannabis as I knew that I would, but I had also tested positive for ketamine. I had wandered into the woods alone. I must have put down my cup to pee, and then I felt wrong. It meant that somebody was there inches from me, silent, hiding, waiting, and predatory, and I had felt safe. A month later, Corinne gave birth to a healthy baby girl. a fatherless girl with Peter's easy smile. By then, my persistent calls to the ranger station were met with faltering patience and thin courtesy. They were still looking. May's parents would be their first call, but I would be their second. But I never got that call. It's been 14 months. This Christmas, like my last one, fell hollow without them. I visited Corinne and Vivian a few days ago. I gave Viv a plushie, the dad from Bluey. I didn't know that it would make Corinne cry, but Viv chewed on its nose, and for a moment, everything felt normal. And then last night, I had a moment of hope. There was a plain envelope in my mailbox with Jack written in big black letters across the front. A part of me saw May's handwriting there. Jack. My stomach bounded. I opened it quickly, savagely, and found two things inside: a thumb drive and a locket. The thumb drive was filled with files of videos, and as I played the first, I was transported. Oh, come on, you're gonna love it. It's called Cherokee Stew. Oh, so it's a Cherokee recipe. It could be. I mean, it's got venison and corn. Maize, I guess. What the heck, Pete? You can't just call something Cherokee Stew because it has deer meat and corn in it. Hey, what's wrong with that? It's a good name, and it's delicious. May, Peter, and me, from a distance. There were dozens of videos like it. The ghostly grayscale of night vision, the clarity of day through a telephotic lens. 2 nights of oblivious us in the myopic comfort of our campfire's light. We were safe. We always were wrong. I watched them all one by one. At night as we slept, they would creep out from the woods and sit around the ashes of our fire. They moved our things, drank our water, ate our food, and listened to us sleep. They never spoke. The boy and the cameraman, but they worked with chilling, silent purpose. And then I got to the video of that night. May didn't scream at first. She thought they were me, and why wouldn't she? They came with duct taped and coarse rope, left her to wait as they made their way to Peter. I still can't answer Corinne's questions. I don't know why they killed him. I wish that I could unknow how. That video had ended with me, still as a corpse, whimpering quietly in some hallucinatory nightmare. I might have screamed if I knew what they had done to May before they came to me. They watched me as her distant muffled screams mingled with their breaths. And I don't know why. I don't know where they took her, and what they did after. I see her constantly because I need to hope, but I don't know if she's alive or dead. I know nothing, or I knew nothing. As I waited for the police to come for the thumb drive, as I began writing this, hoping that someone might offer some reason for any of it, as I ironically began to clean her locket to purge something horrible from something sweet, I looked at that envelope again. In my foolish hope, I had seen May's hand in ambiguity. She knew my address, it made sense. And then the theft of my wallets made sense. They didn't want money, they wanted me, and I don't know why. I lived out in Gresham, Oregon for a couple years. It's a rain-drenched, lush area of the state, located in close proximity to Portland. I was fresh out of high school and eager to seek out new adventures. My friends and I are what you might call rednecks. Mind you, not the type that enjoy watching NASCAR on the lawn sofa, but more the type that love the outdoors. Whether it be fishing, hunting, camping, trail riding, shooting, blowing stuff up, off-roading, or just having a bonfire, we loved it all and spent the majority of our time doing it. We frequented many beautiful locations around that area, including Mount Hood, Mount Bachelor, Goat Mountain, Larch Mountain, the Lolo Pass, and 1,000 Acres, among countless others. But undoubtedly my favorite place was Wildcat Mountain. Back then, Wildcat was the best. It is an old, rather secluded logging mountain located just outside of Sandy, Oregon. Anyone who is familiar with the area will likely have heard of it. There are a few scattered residents there, but they are few and far between. The mountain itself was pretty rough, with mostly old dirt roads and crumbling stretches of broken pavement. A lifted 4x4 truck or Jeep is definitely recommended for those attempting to traverse it. The mountains once played host to countless parties and massive bonfires, with hundreds of people in attendance. I can't even count the amount of drunken fiascos I've been a part of up there. The remote location of the mountain allowed for loud gatherings to occur, while being mostly unheard by locals. The cops also seldom patrolled this area simply because it is so large and difficult to traverse. This of course made it the perfect party spot. Unfortunately, the mountain was recently closed off some time back. A massive old tree was fallen directly on the road that leads to the main trails. The dang thing has got to be at least 15 feet around and weigh a couple of tons. Most people said that this was in response to a 20-year-old girl getting alcohol poisoning up there and not being able to reach the hospital in time. It's tragic, really, but I never did find a conclusive answer. Whatever the reason, the mountain now remains mostly inaccessible to the public, unless you've got a vehicle that is capable of climbing over that monstrous tree. Recently, I was reminiscing about all the good times I've had there over the years, all the forgotten memories with good friends. However, one night in particular stood out to me. It was towards the end of the Wildcat Mountain days, and it still unnerves me to this day. The day started out much like any other. It was a Friday, and I was looking forward to getting off work and enjoying the weekend. It was early springtime and unseasonably warm for that time of year. After texting some of my friends, we decided to head up to Wildcat and have a bonfire after we were off work. I finished out the remainder of my day and texted my friends Eric and Chris. We decided to meet up and gather supplies for the night. Chris worked for a shipping company who always kept a large supply of pallets on hand. Eric and I met him at his work and loaded up several broken pallets into Eric's truck until it was full to capacity. We then headed out to collect our guns and some ammo before departing. I texted Andrea, another friend of mine, and asked her if she wanted to go too. She agreed and told me she was going to bring Brittany and Megan along too. We met up with the girls an hour or so later and proceeded to head out. Eric drove his Chevy Silverado, and Chris and Megan went with him. Andrea and Brittany rode with me in my Jeep Wrangler. We arrived in Sandy a little after 6 that night. We stopped by the gas station and the liquor store to purchase our essentials for the night, and after refueling, we were back on the road. By the time we had arrived on the foot roads of Wildcat Mountain, the sun was beginning to set. Andrea and Brittany had already begun drinking their fruit-flavored vodka, and I could tell that they were already getting a little tipsy. I rolled down the window to feel the cooling mountain breeze as we rode deeper into the mountain. Partway up, Brittany began begging me to stop the car so she could pee. I gave her a hard time about not going when we were at the gas station, but eventually I agreed to stop after she had threatened to let loose on my back seat. I pulled the Jeep over, and Brittany and Andrea hopped out and headed into the woods to the right. Eric pulled his truck up behind me as Megan also hopped out to join the other two girls. I pulled the handbrake before stepping out into the brisk evening. I decided that I might as well go too, as we still had a little bit further to go before we had reached our destination. I began to relieve myself in front of my Jeep, while looking around at the forest around me. Luckily for us, most of the snow had melted already, but trace amounts could be seen in the ditches alongside either side of the road. I took a deep breath of the chilling, damp mountain air, and felt my soul revitalize. The air of nature has always just seemed so calming to me, and it is a most welcome departure from the polluted, stale air of the city. Below us, the pavement lay cracking and obviously quite neglected, even more so than the last time that we had been there. The forest stood silent, with only the occasional sounds of bird calls breaching the rumbling sound of my engine. I scanned the mesmerizing scene until something on the edge of the road caught my eye. In a tree about 30 yards in front of me on the left side of the road, there was something dangling from a tree about 20 feet up. It looked like a rucksack or something. Hunters and campers often string their food up from trees to try and prevent attracting bears, but this one was right at the edge of the road. It would have been a terrible place to camp, let alone to hunt. My headlights just barely illuminated the bottom of it, but it was too difficult to make out what the object actually was. Luckily for me, I kept a large spotlight with me that I could plug into the outlet to my Jeep. Thing comes in handy if you ever drop your phone out there and have no battery. I plugged it in and shined the beam upwards towards the object. At first, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, but soon I was stunned to discover that it wasn't a sack up there, but an entire deer hanging about 25 feet above the ground. Its head hung lifeless, and a massive hole was ripped in its stomach from which entrails, guts, and organs dangled out of. Blood and various fluids had soaked the dirt and snow below the tree. The antlers, which I had first thought to be tree branches, were broken and gnarled, an obvious sign of struggle. I looked around for an anchor line, but there were no visible ropes or ties securing it from anywhere, at least that I could tell. It was just haphazardly sprawled out on a massive tree branch, like someone had launched it out of a catapult and lodged it into the tree. My immediate thought suspected that this was the handwork of a cougar, but the size of the deer made it unlikely. It was a buck, and I'm no expert in deer adolescent rates, but I would say it was pretty close to fully grown. I know that leopards and other big cats will sometimes drag their prey into trees, but could a mountain lion really do that to a fully grown deer? They don't get nearly as big as leopards, and the leopard's prey of choice, the gazelle, is much smaller than a deer. I called out to the other members of our group to come take a look. We all stood around and gawked at the scene for a few minutes. None of us had ever seen anything quite like it, and the grisly sight made me feel an uneasy sense of dread. I voiced my theory of the mountain lion to the others. However, Chris quickly shot it down with the same argument I had used previously. We thought perhaps it was a cruel joke or prank of some sort, albeit a messed up one at that. Serious banter was quickly replaced by jokes about serial killers, and my momentary dread began to subside. For a moment, a strange fleeting thought of retreat crossed my mind, but I wasn't about to let something as meager as a mutilated deer carcass stop me from enjoying my Friday night. We all piled back into the rigs and proceeded further up the mountain, continuing onward as the concrete road gave way to that of a crude gravel one. Several minutes later, we arrived at the infamous fork in the road. The road straight ahead led to miles upon miles of more trails. The path to the right was the way we normally proceeded, but there was quite a substantial amount of snow on that path. After discussing our options for a few minutes, we decided to proceed to the right and attempt the snow to reach a normal spot. Eric pulled his truck around me and rumbled on to the right and into the snowy path despite our initial hesitance. He hadn't gotten more than 100 yards in when he began to run into trouble. His truck was suddenly stopped by the large snow drifts on the road. He went into reverse and crept backwards a few feet. He put it back in drive and attempted to roll forward, but with little success. He repeated the pattern several times before his back end began to sink downwards. With one last effort, he gunned it forward. Snow and slush flung out sporadically as his truck roared in an attempt to free itself. His truck shook back and forth, but soon the tires spun freely in the deep snow. He was stuck. Brittany, Andrea, and I found this all rather amusing as we looked down to Eric struggling to free himself. Eventually, he stopped moving altogether and waved his hand out of the window, signaling his distress. I flipped my Jeep around and began to back up towards him. The idea was to use my twin pair of chains to link our rigs, rear bumper to rear bumper, on the hooks while I pulled straight out, dragging him backwards down the trail. We performed similar maneuvers countless times before, sometimes with 4 or 5 rigs hooked up all at once. Unfortunately, upon inspection of the chains, I quickly realized that they were too short to stretch from the dry gravel to the spot in which Eric was stranded. Because of this, I would have to reverse up the trail into the snow patch in order to get close enough to him. Chris hopped out to guide me backwards, and cautiously, I backed the Jeep up into the snow. We linked up and I began to slowly pull away. The chain pulled taut, and Eric's truck began to shimmy slightly. I only managed to pull him a few feet before I too lost traction. I put my Jeep in reverse and again backed up towards him, this time with the intent of getting a running start for more momentum. By the way, don't ever try this with chains. If either one of those chains would have snapped, they could have easily cleaved one of our heads straight off our body. Regardless, I gunned it and it jerked Eric's truck a bit, but still was not enough to free it completely. The chain was pulled tight and I began to spin my wheels. Back into reverse I went, and then forward again. My engine screamed and my RPMs jumped to dangerous levels, but all I succeeded in doing was spinning the tires and sinking deeper. His truck was just too heavy, and I didn't have enough room for momentum anymore. We both exited our vehicles to once again inspect the situation. My Jeep was now dug deep into the snow, to the point where the fenders were hovering only an inch or two above the top layer. Eric's truck moved maybe 5 feet, but that wasn't even the worst of it. The chain was pulled tight, so tight that we were unable to disconnect it. We were both stuck, now without the ability to leave. Not the first time that had happened to us, however, so we decided to just chill for a bit, and to try to think of a different plan. We broke out the pallets and lighter fluid and sparked up a fire in a dry patch on the side of the road. The drinks came out and all of our troubles of life began to slowly slip away, including the current predicament we found ourselves in. We all laughed and reminisced for a while about all the good times that we had had together. Eventually, after we were all several beers deep, we decided we possessed the cognitive and physical capabilities required to free our trucks. Everyone else was quite drunk by that point except for Eric, who seldom if ever actually drank. Eric, Chris, and I returned to the trucks, and once again, I tried pulling him out. Again, we had little luck moving anywhere, so we busted out the shovels and began digging away at the snow and ice. An hour or so of struggling, digging and drinking passed, and little progress had been made. The chain was still pulled too tight to disconnect, and we were running out of options. we began to realize that we may not be going anywhere for a long time. It's not as though this idea frightened us, at least initially. As I said, we had been stranded before, but it was a bit of an inconvenience. When given the choice of sleeping in my own bed, or in the driver's seat of my Jeep in the middle of the freezing woods, well, that's not a very hard decision to make. We decided our best course of action would be to call our friend Alex and ask for help. By this point, it was around midnight, and we knew Alex would likely be sleeping in definitely less than excited to hear from us so late. Unfortunately, we didn't have much of a choice, unless we wanted to spend the night out there. Eric strolled around our makeshift camp, attempting to get a signal for his phone. But eventually he was successful and managed to get a hold of Alex. Alex was not exactly thrilled about driving all the way up there to help, but he agreed nonetheless. He had a hand winch which we could use to hopefully pry ourselves free of our little situation. The downside was that Alex drove a BMW 323i, and there was simply no way he could make it to where our trucks were located. That meant that we would have to make the journey back down the mountain on foot, to the point where Alex could meet us, a good 3 or 4 mile trek at least. Before we had a chance to thoroughly discuss the plan, Chris rose up in a drunken stupor and began stumbling back down the road towards the bottom. I guess he felt inspired at the time because, next thing we knew, he had disappeared into the darkness. I decided that I had to follow, so I prepared myself to give chase to Chris. I grabbed my Taurus 44 Magnum from my Jeep and gave chase several minutes later. Better to be safe than sorry after all. Eric and the girls elected to stay behind and watch the camp, and so I headed out into the darkness alone. I began walking down the mountain in my slightly inebriated state. The environment away from the fire had gotten very cold, but luckily the alcohol dulled my senses to some capacity. I called out to Chris several times on my way, but he didn't answer back. It surprised me how quickly he had gotten out of earshot for me, but in hindsight, I hadn't left until several minutes after him. That or he was just too drunk to call back. Chris is a guy with an iron will, and once he sets his mind to something, you'd be hard-pressed to stop him. And when he's drunk, that will increases at least tenfold. I walked down the mountain in complete silence for quite some time. By that point, it was probably at least 1 or 2 a.m., and the forest around me had fallen uncomfortably silent. It's strange. I was so used to this place being so loud and full of people and noises, but tonight, I was completely alone in the dark. The normal environmental sounds were non-existent, and the only sound I heard was that of my footsteps meeting the torn-up pavement and snow. Not even a single gust of wind had managed to penetrate the dense canopy of the woods. It was so quiet, I could almost hear the sounds of my own heartbeat. Being alone in a dark forest at night is not a fun sensation. Obviously, there are no lampposts or artificial lights up there, but luckily for me, it was a full moon that night, which illuminated the immediate vicinity enough to travel without need of a flashlight. I could only see as far as the tree line, however, and on either side of the road stood an enclave of monolithic trees and high attention, like soldiers given a command. Seeing past them from the road was nearly impossible. I called out to Chris several more times on regular intervals, but he never did answer me back, so I soon gave up trying altogether. I'll be honest, it did make me quite anxious to not get a response. I continued walking down the mountain for quite a while, past the small dirt pit and down towards the fork in the road. Still, there was not a single sound to be heard from any direction. No chirping of crickets or calls of owls, nor a distant howl of a coyote. Just silence. It's strange what happens when the human mind goes through extended bouts of silence. you never realize how much you rely on sound for comfort. Only in complete silence do you realize how much you miss the white noise ambience. Suddenly, a disruption shot out through the dark woods. The sound of a nearby snapping twig halted me in my tracks. I froze and glanced in the direction in which I thought the sound had originated, hand ready to draw my .44 from its holster. My heart began to pound on my chest as I stared into the darkness of the forest. In that moment, my senses seemed to heighten. I felt every chilling breeze and heard the drip-drop of water from the leaves. I saw nothing, despite my heightened awareness. I questioned myself on whether I had heard the noise at all. I know that the mind can play tricks when in an uncomfortable situation, and I wondered if I had simply fallen for it. Slowly, I began to press onward, while keeping a close eye on the tree line. I hadn't gone even 100 feet when I heard something that made my stomach sink like an anvil. The slight pitter-patter of footsteps in snow emanated slowly from the woods, 4 of them in total with another snapping twig at the end. I stared unblinking in the direction of the noise as the sound halted abruptly. Whatever it was seemed to be aware of the noise it made and stopped to not draw attention. My heart felt as though it was in my throat, as immediately the sensation of being hunted arose in my mind. I still couldn't see anything in the darkened woods, but I now knew I was being followed by someone or something. One of the things they teach in hunter safety is the fact that the only things clumsy enough to snap twigs in the woods are bears and humans. Obviously, a bear would not be a welcome sight in any situation, and if it was a human that was stalking me, then the implications of that cannot be good. I picked up the pace and continued briskly walking, now just trying to get down as fast as possible, and cursing the initial idea of leaving the bonfire in the first place. The thought then crossed my mind that maybe it was Chris trying to spook me. He honestly had never struck me as the prankster type, but I guess under the right circumstance he may go for it. Although he likely knew I was armed, and I doubted he would risk a tragic accident for a quick laugh. It just didn't make any sense, and my mind raced as I tried to figure out what it was that followed me. Not long after the footsteps began to re-emerge, that dreadful pitter-patter of crunching snow lodged my heart to my throat. I decided to just keep walking and see what my pursuer would do. The footsteps continued and began to slowly increase in frequency, as did my heart rate. I began rapidly glancing back over my shoulder, desperately trying to get a glimpse of my stalker. The footsteps seemed to grow closer and closer, but still, I saw nothing. Deciding that I couldn't take anymore, I stopped and drew my revolver. I called out for Chris again, warning him that I was armed and to not mess with me. As I expected though, there was no response. The footsteps had again stopped, leaving me alone in the silence once more. My nerves got the better of me in that moment. I raised my revolver and fired a warning shot into the bank by the tree line away from the direction of the footsteps. The serene night was pierced by the deafening concussion of the bullet. My ears were accosted by the blast, making it difficult to ascertain any response from my pursuer. I waited for a couple seconds, and hearing nothing in response, except for the ringing in my ears. After hearing nothing for quite a while, I decided to continue my descent. Not a minute later, the footsteps returned, but this time at a much more rapid pace. The steps drew ever nearer, now seemingly only a couple of meters away. I began to run now on the brink of absolute terror. Whatever was on my trail was now quite obviously hostile. I heard the crunching and violent snapping of twigs coming from behind me. I turned back to see trees and branches snapping wildly as a large dark figure moved rapidly through the woods. Whatever it was bipedal and massive. The thing had to be at least 10 feet tall. I thought it to be a bear. but knew that chances of a bear moving that quickly on two legs was slim to none. As I glanced back, my foot fell upon a patch of ice, causing me to slide and eventually come crashing down to the frozen ground below. Immediately, I whipped my head back up, aiming a quivering hand with revolver towards the woods. My heart thundered wildly in my chest, but the beast, whatever it was, had stopped. No more movement came from the woods. Quickly, I regained my footing, staring intently into the woods. My pursuer had ceased all movement, and again the environment had fallen silent, save for my labored breaths. I stood and stared towards the woods, desperately trying to identify what or who it was that was after me. By this point, of course, the notion of a human follower was simply out of the question. It seemed like I stood there motionless for hours, but in reality, the adrenaline surge was probably just obfuscating my perception of time. I aimed a shaking arm and revolver towards the woods, debating whether or not to fire another warning shot. Suddenly, a noise chilled me to my very core. A low, guttural howl blared like a crash of thunder from within the woods. The noise was so loud it seemed to shake the very trees around me. It sounded almost like a howler monkey, but at a much lower octave and much more threatening. The roar made me tremble, and in my heightened frenzy, I forgot any notion of standing my ground and took off in a mad sprint down the decrepit road. I was forced to stop after several minutes of desperate, unabated running, unable to continue as my lungs threatened to implode. Damn cigarettes. The entire time, I hadn't so much as glanced behind me. I scanned in all directions, panting heavily from the late night workout. Again, I saw and heard nothing. For several minutes I waited, listening intently while trying to replenish my exhausted lungs. I had almost fooled myself into believing that I had gotten away, until the commotion drew my attention yet again. The crashing and snapping of twigs again began from somewhere back in the woods. I could not see, but definitely could hear the beast in a mad dash towards my position. I raised my revolver again, knowing that my only chance now was to stand my ground and fight. My knees shook wildly below me, threatening to give out at any moment. The wreckage grew closer and closer, until its wake of destruction was in my view. The hulking beast tore through the grove like tissue paper, flinging branches, snow and everything else out of its way like nothing. It reached the edge of the woods, and suddenly stopped about 20 yards away. It was then that I got my first and only look at the creature. My previous estimate of 10 feet was probably a little overzealous, but it did stand at least 7.5 if not 8 feet tall. Thick knotted black hair covered its entire muscular frame from head to toe. Its eyes were deep pools of black or a dark brown which seemed to drink in all the light from the moon above. Its face and jawline were large, but hard to discern in the shadows. The beast stood motionless and almost silent, with the only noise being that of its slow, methodical deep breaths. I've never felt terror so strong as I did in that moment. Animals are good at sensing fear, and despite my horror, I did my best to remain steadfast and unwavering. The beast and I shared a deadlocked gaze with one another, both of us seeming to size the other one up. I clutched my .44 tightly, set dead to rights directly at the creature, and ready to unleash hell at a moment's notice. Every fiber of my being was screaming out for me to shoot the thing, and if it would have charged me, I would have, but it didn't. Instead, it let out another guttural howl, but this time it was significantly lower in volume and tone. I find this part hard to convey, but to me, the screech did not seem like one of a threat, but instead a plea. If the creature truly did not intend to hunt me, then why would it reveal itself to me like that? Why stop and simply stare from the side of the road when it could have easily charged me down during my panic-stricken dash and ripped me apart? I felt my arm slowly lower the revolver to my side, almost subconsciously. The beast let out a grunt and cocked its head from the shadows. We stared at each other again, a strange moment of evaluation between us. The beast broke the stare and took a step forward. The move caught me off guard, and as if on instinct, I again raised the revolver in its direction. The creature then did something that I never would have expected. It froze. As soon as my revolver fell upon it, it ceased all movement, as if the beast knew what a firearm was and the danger it represented. Could an animal possibly understand the significance of such an item? I don't know the answer, but in any case, I chose not to fire. The beast seemed somehow less hostile than I initially thought, and I got the sense that if it truly wanted me dead, then I could do little to stop it anyways. Suddenly, the creature lifted its head and made that low, guttural noise again, this time seeming as if it was surprised by something. I stared in abstract confusion as it lifted its massive right arm and extended its index finger in a curled but definitive pointing motion. Out of my peripherals, I saw lights beginning to increase behind me, but dared not to look for fear of the thing. The increasing lights allowed me to view the creature's face in detail for the first time. It had dark brown, almost black eyes, large ridges on its forehead, and the distinctive facial shape of a primate. The beast then slowly lowered its arm and grunted again, before suddenly turning and charging back into the woods from which it came. The tree branches splintered and exploded as the beast rushed back into the thick blanket of the forest. Just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, and the eerie silence returned. I found myself at a loss after that. I could still sense eyes watching me, concealed in the darkness of the forest, but somehow I knew the beast would not return. I turned in the direction it had pointed, and saw headlights in the distance racing towards me. I holstered my pistol, and the car drove up beside me moments later. It was Chris and Alex, with the lashing winch that we needed to hopefully escape. They greeted me as if nothing was wrong, but soon seemed to sense the shocked look on my face. I was clearly shaken from my encounter, and they could see it. They pried me for answers, but I didn't say much. I couldn't tell them. I would have seemed insane. I was severely hesitant to go back up the mountain, but I knew we had no choice. Alex drove his car as far as it would take us, but once we hit dirt, we knew that it would take us no further. We grabbed the winch and reluctantly headed back up on foot. It took us a good hour to reach the area again, and the entire way I felt severely paranoid. I sensed that we were being watched the entire time. A few times I thought that I heard the footsteps again, and saw shadows in the trees, though the beast never reappeared. Much to my relief, we eventually reached the bonfire again. It was probably 3 a.m. by that point, and the fire had long since extinguished, and only smoldering coals remained. Eric and the girls were all passed out in his truck. We woke him up and, with some struggle, were finally able to free his truck and get out of there. Now I know what most of you are probably thinking. It was Bigfoot, and I'll admit, it sure does seem that way. I've never really believed in such superstition, and just never understood how a primate that large could go unobserved and unconfirmed for so long. Needless to say, I'm a believer now. I think those things are a lot smarter than we ever gave them credit for. From its apparent recognition of my gun, to the way it gestured at the approaching distant headlights of Alex, maybe it's not so outrageous to think that it possesses some advanced cognitive abilities, maybe even close to that of a human's. It would surely require some intelligence above that of a normal primate to be able to elude capture or even video recording for so long. An animal of that size has to have no natural predators, at least not in these woods, and thus the only true threat that it would face would be that posed by the most dangerous animals of all, humans. I've always wondered to myself, and perhaps you've wondered as well. Thousands if not millions of people claim to have seen these creatures or interacted with it to some capacity. Why has no one ever shot one? The mere notion of bringing down such a beast for a promise of fame and notoriety has to get every hunter's blood pumping, not to mention the inherent lucrative incentive which comes stapled to it. Well, I can tell you now, as someone who came face to face with the supposed Bigfoot and had such an opportunity, I never would have felt right taking it. When I looked at that creature, I saw not a demon or a monster. I saw an animal, a primate just trying to survive. It could have hunted me down and torn me limb from limb with ease. Hell, it could have killed all of us that night. It had every imaginable advantage on me, save for the gun, and it didn't take it. It chose to instead confront me and scare me off. I don't know if it had anything to do with that deer in the tree, but maybe that was a macabre warning it had constructed. Perhaps it had a family nearby that it was defending, as primates do normally live in small groups. Who knows? Perhaps it knew that killing me would have meant others would come looking for it. I don't pretend to know exactly why it did what it did, but one thing's for sure. Had I pulled that trigger, I never would have felt right about it. Sure, I could have and probably would have received fame and notoriety from the media, but that's just not me. I have no doubt that there are other hunters out there who would not think twice about shooting it, but I don't want that on my conscience. As soon as that cat was out of the bag, others would hunt the rest of them down relentlessly, driven by the promise of greed and fame. It's how humanity has always been. Someone finds something of value, and the cockroaches swarm to ravage and cannibalize it until nothing remains. Killing that one creature would have doomed the entire species. I've never gone back to Wildcat after that night. It just doesn't feel right anymore. Plus, it's blocked off and near impossible to access except by foot. More importantly though, I came to recognize that that mountain is its territory, and it does not want intruders, and I don't want to try its patience. For those of you who would doubt my account, well then Wildcat Mountain waits for you. Feel free to prove me wrong, and take a midnight stroll up there anytime you desire and report back. I would not encourage anyone to go there, but if you are truly adamant, then I can't stop you. I myself don't plan on ever going back. Lately there's been one thing that's been on my mind though. Maybe the massive parties and tragic death of that girl weren't the only reason that Wildcat Mountain was blocked off by the cops. And maybe it wasn't even blocked off by the cops at all.